You're throwing everything away. My sister Victoria screeched, pacing our parents' living room like a caged animal. The business, your future, everything Dad built. I sat calmly on the leather couch, watching her performance with detached amusement. My parents, Robert and Sophia Lee, stood by the fireplace, their faces masks of disappointment and anger. A backpacking trip through Asia? My father's voice was quiet but sharp. This is how you repay everything we've given you. My name is Olivia Lee, and at 28, I was about to teach my family the difference between perception and reality. The tech division needs you, Victoria continued. You can't just abandon it for some hippie adventure. I almost laughed at that. The tech division she referred to was my creation, a digital transformation arm I'd built within our family's traditional import-export business. In 3 years, I'd turned it from a simple department into the company's most profitable sector. But Victoria, ever the perfect eldest daughter, saw it as just another piece of our father's empire, an empire she was determined to inherit. I've already submitted my resignation, I said quietly. The team knows what to do. Everything's documented. Documented? My mother's voice cracked. Olivia, this isn't about documentation. This is about responsibility, about family. I study her face, the carefully maintained facade of a traditional Chinese mother always putting family first. If she only knew. My flight leaves tomorrow, I said, standing up. I've already packed up my apartment. If you walk out that door, my father said, his voice glacial, don't expect any support from us. No trust fund, no shares in the company. Nothing. Victoria's eyes gleamed with triumph. She'd been pushing for this, I knew. Ever since I'd announced my travel plans 2 weeks ago, she'd been working our parents, painting me as irresponsible, ungrateful, rebellious. What none of them knew was that this was exactly what I'd been counting on. I understand, I replied, picking up my bag. I'll see myself out. As I walked to my car, I could hear Victoria following me. You're making a huge mistake, she called out. You'll come crawling back when your money runs out. I smiled, thinking about the encrypted laptop in my bag, the contracts waiting to be signed, the deals I'd spent months setting up across Asia. While they thought I was throwing away my future on some quarter-life crisis adventure, I was actually about to close the biggest tech acquisitions in our industry's history. My phone buzzed as I started the engine. A text from Alex, my lead developer. Everything's in place. Singapore team is ready. Perfect. The backpacking trip was actually a carefully orchestrated business tour. Over the past year, I'd identified 6 promising tech startups across Asia, each with revolutionary potential but struggling with capital and market access. While running my parents' tech division, I'd been quietly building relationships with these companies, setting up independent investment vehicles, and preparing for this moment. My trust fund. I liquidated it months ago, converting it into cryptocurrency and offshore accounts before anyone could stop me. The shares Victoria was so smug about me losing. I'd already sold them through a shell company I created. I had everything I needed to transform these startups into a tech empire that would make my family's traditional business look like a corner store. But first, I had to let them think they'd won. That night, I checked into the Four Seasons. Not exactly backpacker accommodation, but I had appearances to maintain. Tomorrow I board a first-class flight to Singapore, where the first of my potential acquisitions was waiting. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Alex. Victoria already moving into your office. Want me to activate Protocol Echo? Protocol Echo was our failsafe, a series of carefully crafted digital breadcrumbs that would lead Victoria down exactly the wrong path as she tried to take over my division. She'd find just enough information to think she understood everything while actually understanding nothing. Do it, I texted back. And Alex, make sure she finds the secret folder. The secret folder contained months of fake reports and intentionally flawed code, a digital wild goose chase that would keep her busy for weeks while we executed our real plans. I ordered room service and opened my laptop, reviewing the final details for tomorrow. The first company on my list was a Singapore-based AI firm developing revolutionary machine learning algorithms. Their technology could revolutionize everything from financial trading to medical diagnosis, and they were severely undervalued. My phone lit up with a call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Olivia, her voice cracked slightly. Please don't do this. Your father, we can talk about this. Come home. I deleted the message and turned back to my work. They'd understand eventually, or they wouldn't. Either way, I was done playing by their rules. The next morning, as my flight took off, I received one final text from Victoria. Hope you enjoy sleeping in hostels. Some of us have real work to do. I smiled, sipping my champagne in first class, and began drafting the acquisition paperwork for what would become a $30 million deal. The game was on. Singapore gleamed beneath the early morning sun as my car pulled up to the Raffles Hotel. Inside, Marcus Wong, CEO of NextGen Technologies, was waiting. Olivia. He greeted me warmly, finally dropping the junior tech director act. I grinned. Marcus was one of the few who knew my real plans. We'd been secretly collaborating for months, laying the groundwork for what was about to happen. Victoria's probably redecorating my office as we speak, I said, accepting the coffee he offered. Did she take the bait? He pulled out his tablet, showing me surveillance footage from his company's servers. There was Victoria, logged in under my old credentials, downloading what she thought were NextGen's confidential files. She accessed the honeypot data 3 times last night, he reported. Your sister's nothing if not persistent. The confidential files were actually carefully crafted decoys, just enough real data mixed with subtle misinformation to send any potential competitors down the wrong path. Victoria, in her eagerness to prove herself worthy of running the tech division, was walking right into our trap. Perfect, I said, pulling out my laptop. Shall we begin? The next 4 hours were intense. We finalized the acquisition terms, signed the preliminary paperwork, and set in motion a series of carefully planned stock transfers. By lunch, I owned 51% of NextGen Technologies. My phone buzzed. A message from my father. Victoria says you're trying to access company servers from overseas. Stop this nonsense and come home. I showed Marcus the message. He chuckled. If they only knew you haven't accessed their servers in months. Everything they're seeing is automated responses we set up. Victoria's probably convinced she's tracking my desperate attempts to save my travel money, I agreed. Speaking of which, I opened my encrypted banking app. The first wire transfer was complete, $10 million to NextGen's corporate account. The acquisition was official. Marcus raised his water glass. To the new CEO of NextGen Technologies. And to Phase 1 of Operation Phoenix, I added. Over the next week, I moved through Singapore like a shadow, meeting with tech leaders and investors who'd been waiting for this moment. Everyone knew the Lee family name, but few had realized that the irresponsible younger daughter had been quietly building her own network. My phone kept buzzing with messages from home. Victoria, your access codes aren't working anymore. Guess you should have thought about that before abandoning ship. Mom, the board is very disappointed in you. Please stop this foolishness. Dad, whatever you think you're doing, it won't work. Come home before you embarrass us further. Each message confirmed that my plan was working. They were so convinced by their own narrative, the rebellious daughter on a misguided adventure, that they couldn't see what was really happening. Then came the message I'd been waiting for. Alex, Victoria found the prototype files. She's calling an emergency board meeting. The prototype files contained plans for an AI-driven trading platform, something that looked revolutionary on the surface, but was actually designed to fail in specific, predictable ways. Victoria, eager to prove she could handle the tech division, would undoubtedly push to fast-track its development. How long until she realizes it's a dead end? I asked during my nightly video call with Alex. 2 months minimum, he replied. By then, we'll be ready to launch the real platform through NextGen. My next stop was Seoul, where a quantum computing startup was waiting. Their technology, combined with NextGen's AI algorithms, would form the foundation of something unprecedented. But first, I had to maintain my cover. I posted carefully curated photos on social media, me at tourist spots, pretending to stay in budget hotels while actually working from luxury suites, looking every bit the carefree backpacker. Victoria couldn't resist commenting, "Hope you're enjoying spending your savings on street food while some of us are running a real business." I was in fact enjoying a Michelin-starred dinner with the quantum computing team when I saw her comment. The irony wasn't lost on my dinner companions. Your sister still doesn't suspect. Dr. Park, the quantum team's lead scientist, asked. Victoria sees what she expects to see, I replied, signing another acquisition contract. They all do. By the end of the second week, I owned 2 cutting-edge tech companies and was in negotiations for a third. My initial $30 million investment was already showing returns. But the real test was yet to come, because back home, Victoria was about to discover exactly what happens when you build a platform using compromised code. And I would be ready. 3 months into my backpacking trip, I was sitting in a penthouse office in Hong Kong when the message I'd been waiting for arrived. Emergency, Alex texted. Victoria's prototype just crashed during the investor demo. Total system failure. Your father's livid. I sipped my coffee, watching the sunrise over Victoria Harbor, right on schedule. Within minutes, my phone exploded with messages. Victoria, what did you do to these files? Nothing works. Mom, your sister is devastated. How could you sabotage her like this? Dad, the board is meeting in an hour. You've destroyed our reputation. I forwarded the messages to my legal team. Everything needed to be documented for what came next. Should I tell them about the backup system? Alex asked during our secure video call. Not yet, I replied. Let's see how deep they dig themselves. The backup system was actually NextGen's new trading platform, the real version of what Victoria had tried to build from my decoy files. While she'd been struggling with corrupted code and false starts, we'd been quietly perfecting the technology. My phone rang. Victoria, for the first time in 3 months, I answered. You vindictive, she snarled. You planted those files, didn't you? Set me up to fail. Did I? I kept my voice calm. Or did you just assume you could handle technology you didn't understand? The board is calling for a full audit. Dad's shares have dropped 15% since the demo. Are you happy now? I checked my trading dashboard. The Lee family company's stock was indeed plummeting, which meant it was time for phase 3. Actually, Victoria, I said, I'm very happy. Check your email. I hung up and sent the pre-prepared press release to every major financial news outlet in Asia. Lee Dynamics announces revolutionary AI trading platform. Only it wasn't our father's company making the announcement, it was Lee Tech Solutions, my new company built from the acquisitions I'd made during my backpacking trip. Within an hour, the story was everywhere. The prodigal daughter hadn't been running away. She'd been building an empire. NextGen's technology, combined with quantum computing and 3 other strategic acquisitions, had created something unprecedented. My phone rang again. This time it was my father. What have you done? His voice was barely controlled. Built something of my own, I replied. Without the family name, without your connections. Just me, my skills, and the people who believed in my vision. The board wants answers. Our investors are jumping ship. They should be, I said. Because in about an hour, Lee Tech Solutions is going public, and we're offering to buy out your tech division at a very generous discount, considering its recent difficulties. The silence on the other end was deafening. You planned this, he finally said. All of it, the backpacking story, the files Victoria found. I learned from the best, Dad. You always said business was about strategy, about seeing 10 moves ahead. The IPO was a historic success. By the end of the day, my company was valued at over $500 million. The Lee family business, meanwhile, had lost nearly 40% of its market value. Victoria sent one final message. You could have told me. Like you told me about convincing Dad to pass me over for promotion last year, I replied, or about sabotaging my original proposals for the tech division. She didn't respond. A week later, I returned to Singapore, this time openly as the CEO of Asia's most talked about tech company. The media loved the story, the daughter who turned a backpacking trip into a business empire. My parents eventually accepted my offer to buy their tech division. They didn't have much choice. Their investors were demanding action after the prototype disaster. Victoria, she left the company. Last I heard, she was trying to launch her own startup. I wish her luck. She'll need it. As for me, I kept the backpack I bought for my trip. It sits in my office as a reminder that sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight the story people tell about you. It's to let them believe it until the perfect moment to reveal the truth. My mother finally asked me during a tense family dinner months later, why go through all the deception? Why not just tell us your plans? I looked at her, then at my father, then at Victoria's empty chair. Because you never would have believed me capable of this if I had, I said. You needed to underestimate me, to dismiss me. It was the only way I could build something truly mine. They couldn't argue with that. Today, Lee Tech Solutions is valued at over $2 billion. We're revolutionizing everything from financial trading to medical diagnostics. The family business is now a small subsidiary of my company, a fact that still makes Victoria furious. Sometimes when I'm working late in my office, I look at that backpack and smile. The best journeys, I've learned, aren't always the ones you tell people you're taking. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't in proving people wrong. It's in letting them believe they're right until it's too late for them to do anything about it. As for the $30 million I initially invested, best money I ever spent, not just for the return on investment, but for the look on their faces when they realized that their irresponsible daughter had outmaneuvered them all. The best revenge, after all, isn't just success. It's success they never saw coming. Final note: the Lee family still holds weekly dinners, quiet affairs now filled with careful conversation and calculated politeness. Victoria occasionally attends, but she leaves early, unable to bear the sight of my success. My parents are more accepting, having finally realized that their attempt to control my future only pushed me to create something greater than they'd imagined. And me? I keep that backpack visible in my office as a reminder. Sometimes you have to let people think you're lost to find exactly where you're meant to be.
My name is Amelia, and I was living what appeared to be a perfect life. At least that's how it looked from the outside. My husband, Ethan, was everything a girl could wish for: handsome, loving, and incredibly supportive. We met during our college years, and it was practically love at first sight. We both felt an instant connection that quickly transformed into a deeply meaningful relationship. Oh, come on, Amelia. Let's go to that art gallery I was telling you about. Trust me, you're going to love it, Ethan would often say, enthusiastically pulling me into new experiences. You and your art galleries. Fine, let's go, I'd laugh. I loved his passion for art and life itself. He had a way of making everything seem beautiful and worthwhile. Eventually, Ethan proposed, and we had a wedding that was nothing short of magical. The venue was a gorgeous estate with sprawling gardens lit by the golden glow of sunset, and then by twinkling stars. Our friends and family cheered, their joy palpable as we sealed our vows with a kiss. "As long as we both shall live," Ethan murmured, his eyes locked onto mine as if he were memorizing my soul. "And beyond," I whispered back. That moment felt like a beautiful bubble where only the two of us existed. For a while, I let myself believe that this was it, the happy ever after that every girl dreams of. However, even a picture-perfect life has its shadows, and mine had a name: Carol, Ethan's mother. Right from the start, I could sense her disapproval. It was as though her eyes had this natural ability to scan me like an error message, searching for flaws she could magnify. "So, Amelia, what is it that your parents do?" she'd ask, trying to sound polite during one of our first family gatherings. "My father's a mechanic, and my mom's a nurse," I'd reply. "A mechanic and a nurse. How charming," she'd say, her words weighed down by a thick veneer of disdain. It wasn't just a question of social status or background. It was as if she thought I was fundamentally unsuitable for her son. While Ethan saw me as his equal, a partner to navigate life's ups and downs, Carol saw me as something far less flattering. She would scrutinize my every move, every decision, as if trying to spot some fatal flaw that would make me unworthy of Ethan's love. Despite this, I held on to the belief that love would conquer all obstacles. I was happy and deeply in love with Ethan. We had built a life together, bought a beautiful home, and were making plans for the future. But little did I know that the seed of discord that Carol had planted was about to grow into an insidious tree, its roots threatening to tear apart the life Ethan and I had lovingly built. So the years passed, turning the page to a chapter I never expected, beginning with what seemed like innocent visits from my mother-in-law. If only I'd known the dark turns that lay ahead. In the first couple of years of our marriage, Ethan and I delved deeper into our careers, navigated our shared ambitions, and eventually bought a house that seemed like something straight out of a romance novel. A charming 2-story home with a white picket fence and a garden we couldn't wait to fill with memories. We were on cloud 9, arranging furniture, selecting paint colors, and envisioning the many holidays we'd spend in our sanctuary. Just when it seemed like life was going perfectly, Carol started to visit more frequently. At first, these visits appeared to be well-meaning gestures from a mother who wanted to be a part of her son's life. "Amelia, my mom's planning to visit this weekend," Ethan would announce. "I know things have been a bit strained, but maybe she's coming around. I think it would mean the world to her if you were there," he'd say, his eyes filled with an optimism I wished I could share. "Ethan, it's not that I don't want to get along with Carol. I do, but you know how these visits usually go," I'd reply, hoping he could hear the trepidation in my voice. "I know, babe, but families are complicated. Let's give it another try for us," he'd say, hugging me tightly as if he could squeeze out the worry and apprehension. The problem was, these visits rarely occurred when Ethan was home. More often than not, Carol would find a way to visit when he was away on business trips. This left me alone to face her scrutiny, making the walls of my dream home feel like they were closing in on me. Carol's visits had a pattern. She would ring the doorbell, and I'd open the door with a pasted-on smile, hoping against hope that this time things would be different. "Carol, it's so lovely to see you. Can I take your coat?" I'd offer, attempting to fill the awkward silence that always accompanied her arrival. "I'm fine. Where's Ethan?" She'd snap, not even pretending to be interested in pleasantries. "He had a business meeting out of town. He should be back by tomorrow," I'd respond, trying to keep the atmosphere light. But her next words would always weigh down the room. "Just making sure my son's life is in good hands," she'd say, her eyes scanning our home like a detective searching for clues, her words dripping with double meanings that even a naive ear couldn't miss. Her words misinterpreted, they stuck with me, echoing in my ears long after she had left, fueling my anxiety about the next inevitable visit. It got to the point where the sound of the doorbell would make my heart race as I braced myself for another round of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled insults. I couldn't shake the sense that Carol's visits were more like reconnaissance missions than attempts to connect. It felt like she was gathering information, building some sort of case against me, though for what, I couldn't say. But that unspoken tension bubbled beneath the surface, a dormant volcano that I knew could erupt at any moment. I just didn't know how or when until the day came that transformed those fears into a horrifying reality. Ethan had just left for a week-long business trip, and I found myself alone in our house. That solitude was a double-edged sword. On one side, I relished the quiet moments, the chance to focus on my own interests, read a book, or have a pampering self-care evening. But the flip side was the looming possibility of another visit from Carol. It felt like an impending storm, an unspoken threat that could materialize at any moment. When the doorbell rang on the third day after Ethan had left, my heart sank. There she was, Carol, standing on the doorstep with a smile that seemed as forced as my own. It was almost like she knew she had me cornered, like a cat relishing its captured prey. "Carol, what a pleasant surprise. Would you like to come in?" I greeted her with as much warmth as I could muster. "Of course, Amelia. Where else would I be?" she said, stepping inside and looking around as if she owned the place. "I was just about to make some tea. Would you like a cup?" I asked, trying to steer us towards something resembling normalcy. "I didn't come for tea," she replied, her voice curt. Avoiding eye contact, her gaze drifting around our living room, inspecting the furniture, the walls, and even the family photos we have lovingly arranged. I'd see. Is there something specific you wanted to talk about?" I pressed, my palms sweating, sensing the discomfort hanging in the air like a thick fog. "Not particularly. I just felt like I should check in on my son's home while he's away. A mother worries, you know," she said. The implication was clear. She was here to assess, perhaps even judge, how well I was taking care of the life her son had built. "It's kind of you to worry. But I assured you everything's fine here," I responded, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to sound confident. "We'll see about that," she murmured almost to herself as she sat down on our sofa. making herself at home yet somehow making the home feel less like my own. The atmosphere was so thick with tension that it felt like wading through quicksand. Each second stretched into a minute, each minute into an agonizing eternity. I suggested we have dinner, offered to show her the new renovations we had made to the guest room, and even brought up the possibility of watching a movie together. But each suggestion was met with resistance, passive-aggressive comments, or cold silence. As the evening wore on, I could feel my own walls closing in on me mentally and emotionally. This was my home, the place where I should feel the safest and most comfortable. Yet Carol had turned it into a battlefield fraught with hostility and silent judgment. With a deep breath, I decided to steer the situation towards some resolution. "Carol, since Ethan is away, why don't you stay the night? It's getting late, and I've already prepared the guest room." "I suppose that would be sensible," she said, finally breaking her reticence. But as I moved to grab her overnight bag, I couldn't shake the sense of impending doom. I knew something was about to happen, something that would shatter the uneasy peace we had been balancing on. What I didn't know was just how devastating that something would be. Night had fallen, and the house was quieter than ever, as if it too sensed the impending turmoil. Carol had retired to the guest room, and I was left to my own devices, my thoughts a swirling tempest of unease and anticipation. Maybe I'm overthinking this, I muttered to myself as I headed up to the second floor to fetch some spare blankets for Carol. Ethan had always told me that I had a tendency to overanalyze situations. "You think too much," he'd say with a smile, pulling me into a hug. I wished he were here now to ease my fears and make me feel secure within these walls. Just as I was about to grab the blankets, I heard a loud slam from downstairs. My heart jumped to my throat. That wasn't just a door closing. That was the sound of finality, of something coming to an end. Shaking off my apprehensions, I raced downstairs, calling out, "Carol, is everything all right?" But the only reply was an overwhelming smell of gas filling the air. I rushed to the kitchen and found the door leading to it closed. Pulling at the handle, I realized it was locked. Panic surged through my veins. My mind was screaming frantically. I turned and dashed to the living room, my eyes falling on the window. Without a second thought, I picked up a decorative statue from a side table and hurled it at the glass, shattering it into a spiderweb of broken shards. I climbed out, not caring about the cuts I received from the fractured glass. My mind was singularly focused on getting away, on getting help. The night air was biting, but I felt none of it as I sprinted to the nearest police station. My breaths were shallow, my heart pounding like a drum. The reception area was stark, a lone officer sitting behind the desk. I must have looked like a madwoman, but I didn't care. "Officer, you have to come with me. Someone's trying to burn down my house, and I think it's my mother-in-law," I gasped, my words tumbling over each other. He looked taken aback, but wasted no time. "All right, ma'am, let's go. I'll call for backup on the way." As we drove back to my house, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that I was no longer alone in this nightmare, and dread for what we might find. My thoughts kept drifting to Carol. Could she really go this far? What had I done to deserve this level of malice? The sight that greeted us as we turned onto my street confirmed my worst fears. My beautiful home was engulfed in flames, a monstrous blaze devouring what was once a symbol of love and unity. Firefighters were already at the scene, doing their best to combat the inferno. The officer turned to me, his eyes filled with a complex mix of sympathy and disbelief. "We need to start an investigation immediately. If what you're saying is true, this is a serious criminal offense." "I know, officer, I know," was all I could say as I watched the place I had once felt safe in reduced to ashes and embers. And as for Carol, she had vanished into the night, leaving behind only destruction and betrayal. It was clear that this was the point of no return, the event that had irrevocably shattered not just my home, but my trust in any lingering hope for family unity. The war had escalated into a battle, and I knew then that there could be no peace until justice was served. In the aftermath of the fire, As investigators sifted through the ashes of what used to be my life, the emotional weight was unbearable. Ethan cut his business trip short and rushed home, his face a mask of disbelief and concern when he saw the smoky ruins of our dream home. But it was when I told him about Carol's visit, the locked door, and the smell of gas that his expression changed into something I had never seen before, a mixture of deep hurt and betrayal. "Amelia, are you certain it was my mother?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with desperation, as if clinging to the hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. "Ethan, I wish it weren't true. But who else would lock the door and leave the gas on? I'm scared, Ethan." "What if she tries something else?" I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "God, I can't believe this is happening." "I trusted her, Amelia. She's my mom," Ethan muttered, his eyes distant, grappling with the harsh reality. Before we could further digest the magnitude of what had happened, the police called us in to make official statements. We walked into the police station, the gravity of the moment sinking in. This was the point of no return. Once we took this step, our lives would be irrevocably changed. "Mrs. Amelia, can you recount what happened the night of the incident?" the investigator asked as we sat in the sterile environment of the interview room. I did my best to recall every detail, every moment that led to the horrifying event. She came to visit. It wasn't uncommon, but this time was different. She knew Ethan was away, and then the smell of gas, and then the locked door. I recounted, my voice shaky. "And you're sure it was Carol who locked the door?" the investigator pressed. "I can't prove it. But the house was fine before she came, and she was the only other person there," I said, meeting the investigator's gaze with grim resolve. "Mr. Ethan, do you have anything to add?" The investigator turned to Ethan, looking defeated. Ethan sighed deeply before speaking. "As much as it pains me to say this, Amelia has no reason to lie. We need to find my mother and get to the bottom of this." Days turned into weeks as the investigation continued. The tension between Ethan and me was palpable, not because we doubted each other, but because we were both grappling with the enormity of what had been done and by whom. The foundation of our family had been shattered, and we were struggling to pick up the pieces. Finally, the day came when the police had enough evidence to arrest Carol. When the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, it was as if years of tension, dread, and fear had culminated in that moment. "Ethan, what are we going to do now? Can we really move on from this?" I asked, a heavy weight lifting off my shoulders, but leaving behind a void filled with questions and uncertainties. "I don't know, Amelia," Ethan said, wrapping his arms around me. "But whatever happens, we'll face it together." As we stood there, I knew that this was just the beginning. There would be trials, both legal and emotional. Lies would unravel and truths would be laid bare. But for the first time, I felt like we could finally confront this dark chapter in our lives and turn the page, even if what lay on the other side was unknown. We would face it as we have faced all things, united, even if broken. The courtroom was stifling, an arena of hushed whispers and unspoken judgments. When the judge announced the sentence, 6 years for attempted murder and arson, there was a collective gasp, a release of the tension that had built up over the weeks of the trial. Carol, for her part, looked neither remorseful nor surprised, but her eyes met mine for a brief second, and in them I saw a glimmer of something I couldn't quite place. Regret, perhaps, or maybe just the realization that she had lost. As much as this verdict brings some closure, the family is shattered, possibly beyond repair, said Ethan as we exited the courthouse, a throng of reporters clamoring for comments. "Yes, the family is broken, but not us, Ethan. We'll find a way to heal, even if it takes time," I replied, feeling the urge to reassert the strength of our partnership amidst the ruins of our larger family dynamic. The car ride home was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life. Words hung in the air like invisible barriers we didn't quite know how to navigate. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Amelia, do you think you'll ever be able to forgive her?" "I'm struggling to even understand her, let alone forgive her," he confessed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. Ethan, forgiveness is not about her. It's about us. It's about not carrying this heavy burden for the rest of our lives, but understanding why she did it. I don't know if I'll ever get there, I responded, my eyes focused on the road ahead, both literally and metaphorically. We have to rebuild, Amelia. We've lost a home, but we can't lose each other. Where do we even start? Ethan asked, his voice tinged with despair. We start with a fresh slate. We've been through the worst life has to offer, and we're still standing. Maybe a bit bruised, but united, I said, feeling a newfound resolve take hold. Weeks passed, and we temporarily moved into a small apartment while the insurance issues were sorted and our home was rebuilt. I couldn't set foot on the old property without feeling a surge of emotion, so we decided to sell it. Too many memories, both good and bad, were entangled in those walls. It was time for a new beginning.
The text message glowed on my phone screen in the darkness of my car. St. Augustine's Chapel, 2 p.m. You need to see this. Unknown. My hands trembled as I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, watching as guests trickled into the small stone chapel through the blur of my rain-splattered windshield. I'm Julia, and right now, I'm sitting here like some amateur detective, wondering if I've finally lost all sense of reality. My husband, Eric, told me he had a conference in Seattle. That's what his calendar said. That's what his assistant confirmed. That's what the hotel reservation showed. And yet here I am, parked across from a chapel in Austin, because some anonymous text has upended everything I thought I knew. This is insane, I whispered, but my hand was already reaching for my sunglasses. The bells began to toll mournfully as I stepped out of the car. My heels clicked against the damp pavement, each step carrying me closer to a truth I wasn't sure I could handle. I slipped in through the chapel's side entrance, my back pressed against the cold stone wall. The scent of incense and old wood surrounded me, bringing back memories I didn't ask for. 7 years ago, I stood in a similar place hand in hand with Eric, promising forever. The organ began to play, the sound loud and jarring in my ears, and that's when I saw him. Eric. My Eric. Standing at the altar in a crisp black suit I didn't recognize, hands clasped, that all too familiar tick in his jaw giving away his nerves. He's not in Seattle. I gripped the edge of the pew as my knees threatened to buckle. My breath caught when she appeared, the bride, walking slowly down the aisle, her dark hair flowing, her familiar silhouette unmistakable. Kara. My best friend. The woman who helped me choose my wedding dress. The one who spent summers at my family's cabin. The woman I trusted more than anyone else. The priest began speaking, but his words were drowned out by the deafening silence in my mind. My husband and my best friend, standing in front of everyone, exchanging vows of love and fidelity, vows he'd already given to me. I don't remember leaving the chapel. I don't remember driving home. What I do remember is sitting in my pristine kitchen, the one Eric insisted on remodeling last year, watching the sun dip below the horizon through windows that now felt like bars on a cage. My phone buzzed. Eric. Conference running late. Don't wait up. The audacity of his lie nearly made me laugh. Instead, I poured myself a glass of the whiskey he kept for special occasions. It burned going down, grounding me in something real when everything else felt like an illusion. My phone buzzed again. Unknown, now you know. What will you do about it? I stared at the screen, their question echoing in my mind. What will I do? I laughed, the sound sharp and foreign, slicing through the quiet. I opened my laptop, my fingers moving with purpose. Dear Aunt Meredith, I hope this email finds you well. I've been thinking maybe it's time to organize that family reunion you've always wanted. Because betrayal isn't just about the act. It's about the intricate web of lies that came before it, the innocent smiles, the casual reassurances, the way they both made me feel like I was crazy for ever doubting them. Eric has always been a smooth talker. So has Kara. But they forgot one thing. I'm just as good at their game. I took another sip of whiskey, the bitterness matching the anger in my chest. Let them have their moment. Let them think they've won. Because I've got time. And I have something they don't. I have their trust. The photo album felt heavy on my lap, each page a reminder of memories that now felt like lies. There we were, the three of us at 16, Eric, Kara, and me, sprawled across the grass at my uncle's cabin. Eric's arm was thrown around both of us, as we laughed at some forgotten joke. "Dinner's here," Eric called from downstairs, his voice echoing through the house like a ghost. His footsteps thudded up the stairs, each one grating against my nerves. 3 days. 3 days since his wedding to Kara, and he's been acting like nothing happened. Like I don't know. He pushed open the door, holding 2 plates of Chinese takeout, his usual peace offering. "Remember when we used to get Chinese with Kara every Friday?" I said before I could stop myself, the words sharp as glass. Eric froze for half a second. "Blink and you'd miss it." But I didn't. "That was a lifetime ago," he said carefully, his smile forced. "Was it?" I stood, letting the album drop to the floor with a heavy thud. The sound made him flinch. "Julia," he said slowly, setting the plates down. He approached me with that same placating look he used when handling difficult clients. "Have you been drinking?" I laughed, the sound cold and sharp, my mother's laugh after my father left. "Is that your move? Gaslight me into thinking I'm crazy?" His expression flickered. "I'm worried about you. When did it start?" The question burned my throat. "Before our wedding? After? Tell me, Eric. Was I the cover story or the backup plan?" "You're not making sense," he said, his voice too calm. But his left hand twitched, his tell when he was lying. 7 years together, and I knew every one of his habits. Funny how the cracks shine brighter when you start looking for them. "I was at St. Augustine's on Tuesday," I said, my voice level. "Nice suit, by the way. Better than the one you wore for our wedding." The mask slipped for just a moment, his eyes going cold and calculating. This was the real Eric, the one I had refused to see. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice low. "Don't." I cut him off, my voice firm. "Don't insult me with excuses. I watched you marry my best friend, Eric, while I sat in this house being your perfect, oblivious wife. What should I think?" Ak runs a hand through his hair, a tell I've cataloged after years of marriage. "It's complicated, Julia. There are things you don't understand." "Like what?" I snap, my voice cutting through the room. "The joint accounts you opened? The property you bought? Or maybe the fact that your father knew the whole time. That stops him cold." "How did you?" I let out a humorless laugh and moved to the dresser, pulling out the stack of papers I've spent the last 3 days gathering. "I'm not the fool you think I am, Jack. You should really use better passwords than our anniversary date. Though I guess that doesn't mean much now. Julia, please." He takes a step forward, reaching for the documents. I hold them back, my grip iron tight. "Work this out. Like you explained your business trip to San Francisco?" I spit, slapping the bank statements, property deeds, and emails onto the bed like a deck of poison cards. "Or should we talk about the trust fund Hazel set up for you and Lily's future children?" His face goes pale. "You had no right," he growls, his voice shaking with fury. "I had every right." The scream tears out of me, raw and primal. "I'm your wife, Jack. I was her friend. We grew up together, all 3 of us. And you," my voice breaks, my breath coming in harsh, uneven gasps. He stares at me like he's never seen me before. Maybe he hasn't. Maybe I've never seen myself either. "Get out," I say, my voice steady now, hard as steel. "This is my house, too." "Not anymore." I pull out one final piece of paper, a power of attorney he signed last year when he was too busy to handle our estate planning. "You really should read what you signed, Jack." I step back, refusing to look away. "Now leave, before I call Sam and have him escort you out." He doesn't leave because he's afraid. He leaves because he knows this is just the beginning. Jack knows me well enough for that. I pick up the old photo album from the floor, flipping through pages I no longer trust. There we are at 17, sprawled across my aunt's porch, grinning like idiots. Jack's arm draped casually over Lily and me. 3 friends who swore on everything that we'd never betray each other. Perfect liars. The cafe feels smaller now, though maybe it's the weight of what I'm about to do. Or maybe it's that everything from my past feels insignificant now, shrinking with every betrayal I uncover. Lily slides into the chair across from me, still wearing a wedding band that matches mine. The sight makes my coffee taste like acid. I didn't think you'd come, she says, her fingers tracing the rim of her untouched latte. Funny, I say softly. I didn't think you'd marry my husband. She flinches. Julia, did you know about the trust fund? I interrupt, sliding a stack of bank statements across the table like cards in a rigged poker game. What trust fund? She asks, blinking in genuine confusion as she scans the documents. The one Hazel set up for Jack and your future children, I say, watching her carefully. $3 million. Guess I wasn't producing grandchildren fast enough. Her face goes pale. This can't be right. She pushes the papers away like they might burn her. Jack said the marriage was formal. Just for the inheritance. I laugh, a hollow, jagged sound. What exactly did he tell you, Lily? That he loved you? That I was cold? Obsessed with work? That's what he told his father about me last month. Her head snaps up, her eyes wide. How do you know that? Because, I say calmly, pulling out my phone, I've spent the last week learning how thoroughly Jack has been playing us both. Do you want to hear the recording? Him discussing how your family's real estate connections helped seal his investments. My family's. Lily's voice trails off. Hazel, her mother, owns one of the largest real estate firms in Austin. Jack knew that long before he ever asked me out. Did you ever wonder why he chose us? I ask softly. Two best friends who swore they'd never betray each other. It was the perfect cover story. Stop, Lily says, standing abruptly. Her chair scrapes against the tile. You're trying to hurt me because I hurt you. I get it. I deserve it. But, sit down, I say, my voice sharper now. She freezes, more from shock than obedience, then slowly lowers herself back into the chair. Remember that summer internship Jack arranged for you at Hazel's firm? The one that convinced your mother he was such a perfect guy. I slide another document toward her. Look at the date on the property transfer. Her hands shake as she reads. This is my mother's signature. But she would never sell that property for half its value.
She didn't know she did.
Check the witness signatures. Her face crumples as realization hits. This is my handwriting. You notarized it, Lily. I say gently, though the words are bitter in my mouth. While you were planning your wedding to him, Jack was using you to steal from your own family. She looks up at me, really looks at me for the first time. What are you going to do? I stand, gathering the papers. Wrong question. The real question is, what are we going to do? Her brow furrows. You have two choices, I say, pulling a small USB drive from my bag and setting it on the table. You can keep playing his game and lose everything. Or you can help me take him down. This drive contains everything. Your family's connections, Hazel's properties, my savings. Jack's entire plan was built on the assumption that we'd never compare notes. She stares at the drive like it might explode in her hands. If this gets out, everything burns. I place my hand over hers, feeling the cold metal of her wedding ring that matches mine. This time, Lily, we'll be the ones holding the matches. Her fingers close around the drive, and for the first time, I see a flicker of the friend I once knew. Lily's gaze holds mine, fierce and unrelenting. It's a glimpse of the friend I used to know, the one who is unstoppable when crossed. When do we start? She asks. I smile, and for the first time in weeks, it feels real. We already have. The dining table is covered in chaos, bank statements, deeds, emails, the artifacts of betrayal. 3 empty wine bottles sit on the counter, mocking me. Not my usual poison, but tonight isn't usual. My phone buzzes. Another message from Jack. Jack, please. Let's talk about this rationally. Rationally, I mutter to myself. Like the systematic way he built this house of lies. Like the calculated precision with which he played us both. Another buzz. This time, it's Lily. Lily, Hazel is asking questions. We need to move faster. I shut the phone off, but my hands tremble. The weight of what we're planning finally hits me. This isn't just about Jack anymore. This is about families. Reputations.
Lives.
The doorbell rings. I freeze for a moment, then hear the familiar click of a key in the lock. Only one person besides Jack has that key. Jesus, Julia. Charlie's voice fills the room as he steps into the chaos. His eyes scan the papers spread across the table. When's the last time you slept? Did you know Jack's father killed himself? My voice is hoarse, but steady. Charlie freezes mid-step.
What?
10 years ago, right after Jack graduated law school, I push a yellow newspaper clipping across the table. Officially, it was a hunting accident. Unofficially, I shove another stack of bank records toward him. He discovered that Hazel and Jack were embezzling money. For years. Christ. Charlie sinks into a chair, his face pale. Does anyone else know? Just the person sending me anonymous tips. I tap the burner phone resting on the table. They sent me this today. I slide a scanned copy of a suicide note toward him. William tried to stop them. Charlie. He tried to expose them, and they... My voice cracks. Charlie reaches for my hand, but I pull away. I'm becoming them. The words taste like ash. All these plans for revenge. For justice. I'm turning into exactly what I hate. No, you're not, Charlie says firmly, leaning toward me. You're protecting people. Hazel's company, your future, Lily's. Am I? I pace the room, my chest tightening. Or am I so focused on destroying Jack that I don't care who gets caught in the crossfire? What about Jack's sister's kids? They'll lose their college fund when we expose Hazel's financial schemes. Or Hazel's employees. They'll lose their jobs. What about Alexander? He tried to do the right thing and died for it. I grab an empty wine bottle, clutching it in frustration. What does that make me? Charlie is quiet for a long time. Then, he gently takes the bottle from my hand. You want to know the difference between you and them? I look away, but he presses on. You're standing here at 3 a.m, torturing yourself about the consequences of your actions. They're sleeping peacefully, counting their money and planning their next move. That doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't. Charlie starts organizing the papers, stacking them methodically. But it means you have a choice. You can expose everything dramatically at the reunion, like you planned. Or what? I ask warily. Or we do this the right way. Legally. Carefully. He holds up William's suicide note. We finish what his father started. But we protect the innocent first. The burner phone buzzes again. Another message from the unknown source. Ask Hazel about the offshore accounts. I stare at the message, then at the mess of documents. 7 years of lies and betrayal scattered across my dining table. Okay, I say finally. Show me how to do this right. Charlie nods, already dialing his phone. First, we need to talk to someone who specializes in financial fraud. I know a guy. Wait. I grab his arm, forcing him to look at me. Before we do this, I need to know, are you helping me because I'm right? Or because I'm your sister's? His gaze holds mine. Both. And neither. I'm helping because someone needs to stop them. And you're strong enough to do it without becoming like them. I look at the empty bottles, the scattered evidence of my near descent into their world. Maybe Charlie's right. Maybe there is another way. The lawyer's office feels sterile, all polished mahogany and neatly stacked files. Thomas, a financial fraud specialist, spreads a series of documents across the table. I'm fixated on a single sheet, a list of names. Children, mostly. These are the beneficiaries of the trusts connected to Hazel's accounts, James says. If you move forward with this, those trusts will collapse. How many people are we talking about? My voice sounds distant, hollow. Directly? Around 30. Indirectly? Hundreds. This isn't just exposing fraud. This is dismantling a system that's been in place for generations. Charlie leans forward. But we can prove it easily. The question is whether we should. My phone buzzes. Lily. Hazel found the missing property documents. She's calling Laura today. Charlie reads over my shoulder. If Hazel confronts Laura directly, everything falls apart anyway. How long would it take to protect the innocent parties? I ask James. Weeks. Months. The door bursts open before he can finish. Isabella steps in, her designer heels clicking against the floor. Her usual composed facade is cracking, her eyes wild. I should have known you'd run to Charlie, she hisses. James stands abruptly. Laura. My daughter works in this building, James. Did Julia tell you that part? Did she tell you how many families she's willing to destroy for her revenge? That's rich, I say, standing to face her. Coming from you? Charlie steps forward, placing himself between us, but Laura barely spares him a glance. Her focus is entirely on me. You think you're protecting people, Julia? Her voice is cold, deliberate. William thought the same thing. Look where that got him. The room seems to shrink, the city noise outside fading into nothing. My knuckles whiten as I grip the back of a chair. What did you just say? Laura's smile is sharp enough to cut. Did your anonymous friend forget to tell you the full story? William didn't just discover what we were doing. He tried to stop it. He tried to fix things, set up protections for the beneficiaries, just like you're planning. And you stopped him, I whisper, the pieces clicking into place. The hunting accident, it wasn't an accident, was it? Laura's gaze flickers, just for a moment. The point, Julia, she continues smoothly, stepping closer, is that some systems can't be dismantled without destroying everything they support. You're not just fighting Jack or me. You're fighting decades of carefully balanced arrangements. Arrangements built on lies and theft, I snap. Arrangements built on necessity, she counters coolly. Did Jack ever tell you why he married you? Your family's connections, 3 generations of judges and prosecutors. You are the perfect shield. My phone buzzes on the table, Hazel's name flashing on the screen. Take the call, Laura murmurs, her voice almost soft. Listen to Hazel. Hear what her daughter's been hiding. Watch another family shatter. Or, she pulls out an envelope from her coat and sets it on James's desk. We can discuss alternatives. Charlie's voice sharpens. Julia, don't. What alternatives? I ask, my voice even, though my heart pounds against my ribs. A clean break, Laura says, gesturing toward the envelope. A generous settlement. The innocent parties remain protected, and everyone walks away unscathed. Everyone except justice, Charlie snaps. Laura laughs softly, her gaze locking onto mine. Ask yourself, Julia, do you want justice or do you want peace? My phone buzzes again. Emma's messages join Hazel's calls. The list of names stares up at me from James's desk. Children, families, futures that could be undone by a single choice. How long do I have to decide? I ask, the words tasting like surrender. Until Hazel finishes reading those documents, Laura replies. She moves to the door, pausing to deliver one final blow. Choose wisely, Julia. Unlike William, you still have a choice. The door clicks shut behind her, and the room feels both too large and suffocating. You can't seriously be considering this, Charlie says, his voice low but urgent. I pick up the list of names, then glance at my still buzzing phone. What if she's right? What if trying to fix this makes everything worse? That's fear talking, not justice, Charlie counters. Maybe, I murmur, turning to James. But what if fear is trying to tell us something important? The phone buzzes one final time, then falls silent. Whatever Hazel discovered, it's too late to stop it now. I pick up Laura's envelope, its weight pressing against my ribs. I need to talk to Lily, I say finally, before we decide anything else. The Mitchell estate looms ahead of us, its massive windows glowing like warning beacons in the dusk. Cars are already lined along the circular driveway, every player already assembled for what they think is an anniversary celebration. Last chance to back out, Charlie murmurs, the briefcase full of evidence heavy in his grip. Emma steps up beside me, her voice tight. They're already inside. Hazel is with them. Jack's watching the door. I adjust my black dress, funeral appropriate, though no one knows that yet. Did you secure the exits? I ask quietly. Charlie nods. James's people are stationed at every door. Once you start, no one leaves until everything's out in the open. The envelope burns against my skin, tucked beneath the fabric of my dress. Laura's offer of silence still unopened, still a possibility. We enter through the kitchen. Caterers bustle around us, unaware they're serving the Last Supper of the Mitchell dynasty. Jack spots me immediately, relief flickering across his face before suspicion takes its place. He moves toward me, champagne glass in hand. "Julia," he says softly. "I didn't think you'd come." "Julia," he says softly. "I didn't think you'd come." "And Miss Laura's parties?" My smile feels like shards of glass. "I wouldn't dream of it." His gaze shifts from me to the briefcase Charlie carries, then to Emma, standing resolute at Hazel's side. I see the moment realization hits him, but Laura's voice cuts through the room. "Everyone, please gather in the main hall." The crowd begins to shift, pulling us with it. I catch glimpses of familiar faces. Hazel, pale but composed. Laura's second husband, smiling obliviously. Jack's sister, clutching her children's hands. The children. My stomach twists. Laura raises her glass. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate." "Actually," I interrupt, stepping forward. My voice carries through the sudden quiet. "I'd like to say something first." Jack moves toward me, panic in his eyes, but Charlie steps in his path. Emma positions herself near Hazel. "Julia," Laura warns, her voice low. "Think carefully about what you're doing." I pull out the envelope she gave me, still sealed. I've thought about it for weeks. About nothing else. I turn to the room, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. About justice. About protection. About who deserves the truth and who deserves mercy. Jack's voice breaks through, raw with fear. "Julia, whatever you think you know." "I know everything," I say sharply, snapping open the briefcase. I don't pull out the documents yet, but the message is clear. About William's death. About the trust funds. About your 2 marriages. About Laura's schemes. And every lie you told to keep this house of cards standing. The room erupts into whispers. Hazel steps forward, her face ashen. "Emma?" Hazel's voice cracks. What is this?" "I'm sorry, Mom," Emma says, her voice trembling. "I didn't know. Not until Julia showed me." Hazel's husband demands answers. Jack's sister clutches her children tighter, confusion etched across her face. I look at the children, their innocent futures dangling on my next words. Laura's envelope burns against my ribs. "The truth," I say softly, "is that I came here tonight to destroy everything. To expose decades of fraud and manipulation. To get justice for everyone who's been hurt by the Mitchell family's lies." I pull out the first document, William's real suicide note. Laura freezes, her expression finally breaking its perfect composure. But standing here, looking at all of them, I meet Jack's eyes and realize something worse than being deceived. Worse than being betrayed. "Julia," Charlie warns, his voice sharp with caution. But I continue. "It's becoming the very thing you're fighting against." I strike a match. When did I take it from my purse? It doesn't matter. I touch it to Laura's envelope. The paper catches quickly, flames devouring the lies within. I drop it into the briefcase. "No." Charlie lunges forward, but it's too late. The evidence burns, years of careful investigation reduced to ash. And with it burns my chance at justice, revenge, everything I thought I wanted. The fire alarm shrieks. Sprinklers activate, sending water cascading over us. People rush for the exits, pushing past James's guards in the chaos. Through the smoke and spray, my eyes lock with Laura's. She knows what I've done. Chosen mercy over justice, chosen to protect the innocent over punishing the guilty. But her triumphant smile falters as I pull out my phone and press send. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's redemption. The police lights paint the estate's kitchen in alternating red and blue. Laura sits across from me at the marble island, both of us dripping from the sprinklers, watching officers carry out boxes of evidence. The real evidence. Not the decoy files I burned. "Copies," I say quietly. "Everything in that briefcase?" "Just copies. The originals went to the FBI an hour ago." Her perfectly manicured nails drum against her coffee cup. "You chose this moment deliberately. The party, the family gathering. Like father, like daughter-in-law." I slide William's actual suicide note across the counter. "He planned to expose everything at your anniversary party too, didn't he?" Before the hunting accident. The drumming stops. Through the window, I see Jack being led to a police car. Charlie's standing nearby, his expression grim. You don't understand what you've done, Laura says, her voice trembling. Those trust funds were protecting people. I pull out my phone and show her the court orders. Every innocent beneficiary has been legally separated from the fraudulent accounts. The children will keep their college funds. The medical care continues. For the first time, real fear flickers in her eyes. How? I had 3 weeks after you gave me that envelope. 3 weeks where you thought you'd won. I lean forward. Did you really think I spent that time doing nothings? A commotion at the door draws our attention. Hazel enters, flanked by federal agents. Her eyes lock on Laura's. You killed him, Hazel says flatly. You killed William when he tried to protect my daughter from your schemes. Laura stands so abruptly her chair topples over. That's ridiculous. William was going to expose how you used Lily to access Hazel's company records. I interrupt. How you manipulated Jack into marrying both of us to maintain your financial facade. Everything I did was for this family, Laura snaps. No, Lily steps into the room, tear-streaked but steady. Everything you did was for yourself. And now we all know why. I slide one final document across the counter, an old photograph. Laura goes utterly still. William wasn't just trying to expose the fraud, was he? I say, watching her face crumble. He discovered something else. Something about Jack's real father. About why you needed the Carter family's connections so desperately. Mom. Jack's voice drifts in from outside, muffled but urgent. Mom, what's happening? Laura lunges for the photograph, but Hazel is faster. Her gasp echoes in the suddenly silent kitchen. That's my father, Hazel whispers. With Laura. 37 years ago. She turns to me, her voice trembling. 9 months before Jack was born. The truth hangs between us like smoke, the weight of decades of manipulation crashing down in an instant. Laura's perfect image, meticulously crafted, shatters before our eyes. You destroyed everything, Laura whispers. Just like William tried to. No, I stand, gathering the remaining documents. You destroyed everything the moment you chose lies over love. William tried to save us. All of us. And now, finally, he has. What do you mean? Laura's voice cracks. I pull out my phone one last time and show her the message chain. From a dead man's scheduled emails. Breadcrumbs he left for anyone brave enough to follow them. William knew he might not survive trying to expose you, so he made sure someone would. Laura's eyes widen as officers approach to escort her out. Through the window, I see Jack watching, his face pale as Hazel shows him the photograph. Understanding dawns in his expression, and with it, devastation. Was it worth it? Laura asks as they lead her away. Burning everything down to save a dead man's honor? I think of the children upstairs, their futures now secure. Of Lily and Hazel, finally free from manipulation. Of William, who died trying to protect us all. Some things, I say quietly, are worth burning for. The sun rises over the estate, painting the ruins of the Mitchell dynasty in gold. In the distance, sirens fade. Charlie stands beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. You okay? He asks. I watch as Laura disappears into the back of a police car, her empire crumbling behind her. No, I admit honestly. But I will be. Because sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it just shows you who you really are. The last box from Jack's study sits unopened on my kitchen counter. Through the window, autumn leaves scatter across the yard where 3 kids once promised to be friends forever. My phone buzzes. A message from Lily. Hazel wants to meet both of us. The trial ended yesterday. Laura and Jack, both guilty. The headlines called it justice. The society pages called it scandal. Neither captured the truth. I lift the lid on the box, expecting more evidence. Instead, I find an old video camera, the kind we used that summer before college, when everything still felt possible. The doorbell rings. Lily stands there, looking smaller somehow. More like the girl I used to know than the woman who helped unravel everything. I found mine too, she says, holding up an identical camera. In Mom's attic. We set them on the counter, relics of who we used to be. Neither of us reaches to turn them on. Did you read Jack's statement? She asks. No, I pour us both coffee, a habit from before, when friendship was simple. Did you? Her laugh is brittle. He said he loved us both. And for a moment, I actually believed it. I slide her cup across the counter, my voice steady. That's Jack, I say. Living his own truth, even when it's a lie. The afternoon light catches the cameras on the counter, their lenses casting twin shadows on the wall. Emma brushes her fingers against one gently. We should watch them, she murmurs. Before Hazel arrives. Before we decide what happens next. I nod. We both know Hazel's meeting isn't just about reconciliation. It's about the future of her company, about trust and second chances, about whether some bridges can be rebuilt after they've burned to ash. I connect the first camera to my laptop. The screen flickers to life, and there we are, young, laughing, whole. Jack is behind the camera, narrating with the enthusiasm of someone who thinks the world is his to shape. It's our last summer together, before college, before choices. Before we learned how love and lies could wear the same face. Stop, Emma says suddenly, her voice tight. I pause the video. The frame freezes on our younger selves sharing some forgotten joke. But it's Jack's reflection in the window that catches my eye, the way he watches us both. The calculating expression. Planning, even then. He didn't destroy us, I say softly, the realization sinking in. He just showed us who we already were. Emma's brows knit together. What do you mean? You always wanted adventure. I always needed control. He just weaponized those truths. Emma's coffee sits untouched, growing cold. The second camera remains dark and unwatched on the counter. Some truths I'm learning don't need to be seen to be understood. Now we choose, I say, meeting her eyes. Not between right and wrong. Between easy and true. The doorbell rings again. Hazel. Before Emma moves to answer, she grips my hand. Her voice drops to a whisper. I'm sorry. Not for loving him, but for forgetting how to love you first. I squeeze her hand in return, remembering Laura's final words at the trial, love makes liars of us all. Maybe, I say, we stop trying to fix the past. Maybe we just build something new. She nods, understanding the weight of what I'm not saying, about Hazel's company, about second chances, about how sometimes revenge isn't about destroying what was, but creating what could be. I open the door to Hazel. She carries herself differently now, straighter, stronger, free from decades of manipulation. The autumn wind scatters leaves across the yard, a reminder of change. Somewhere, in a prison cell, Laura plots her appeals. In another place, Jack writes letters we'll never read. Life moves forward, messy and imperfect. The cameras stay on the counter, untouched. Some memories don't need revisiting. Some truths are better lived than remembered. Hazel spreads papers across my kitchen table, plans for rebuilding, for moving forward. Emma and I exchange glances, remembering other papers, other plans, other choices. Ready? Hazel asks. I think of William, setting truth bombs to detonate years after his death. Of Laura, building walls to protect secrets that were never worth keeping. Of Jack, loving so desperately he forgot how to love honestly. Yes, I say and mean it, because sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting free. My wealthy parents left my sister an $80 million estate and gave me an old, dusty workshop. She mocked me, calling me a loser, but little did she know that junk would change everything. When I stepped inside the workshop, I stumbled upon a hidden safe. What I found inside left me speechless. It was worth 10 times more than her inheritance. The real shock. My sister tried to take it from me. But what happened a few days later, no one could have predicted. My name is Rebecca Miller, and I never thought I'd be standing where I am today, looking back at how everything started. If someone had told me that my biggest betrayal would lead to my greatest success, I would have laughed in disbelief. But life has a funny way of taking you places you never expected. It all began on a cold Tuesday morning in January, a few weeks after my parents' tragic plane crash. The loss itself was shattering. They were my world. even if they didn't always see me the way I wanted them to. My parents, William and Clara Miller, were wealthy, powerful, and well-respected in New York City. My dad built a fortune in real estate development, and my mom was a philanthropist with a talent for managing investments. Together, they had built a legacy worth millions, $80 million to be exact. But their wealth had always cast a long shadow over my life, one I could never seem to step out of. When the time came for the reading of the will, I knew I wasn't the favored child. My older sister, Sophia, had always been their golden girl. She's the type of person who can walk into a room and command everyone's attention. Glamorous, confident, and utterly ruthless. She's 35 now, but even growing up, Sophia was the one who always got everything right, at least in my parents' eyes. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the dreamer. I had always been interested in computers and technology, and while I had a decent career in software development, it was nothing compared to Sophia's flashy lifestyle. She managed the family's assets like a pro, or so everyone thought. The will reading took place in Mr. Carter's office. He was our family lawyer, a stiff, formal man in his 60s with a habit of adjusting his glasses every 5 seconds. The room felt suffocating, filled with mahogany furniture and the tension that comes when money is involved. Sophia sat next to me, dressed in a designer black dress and dripping in gold jewelry. Aunt Victoria, my dad's older sister, was also there, frowning like she always did when she looked at me. Mr. Carter cleared his throat and began reading the will. To my beloved daughter Sophia, he said, we leave the family penthouse in Manhattan, our investment portfolio, and all liquid assets. I watched as Sophia's lips curled into a triumphant smile. Of course, she got everything. I sat there, trying to prepare myself for whatever scraps might be left for me. And to Rebecca, Mr. Carter continued, glancing at me over his glasses, we leave the Miller workshop in Cleveland, Ohio. The silence that followed was deafening. The workshop? I hadn't thought about it in years. It was a small property my grandpa had owned, a place he tinkered with his inventions. It had been abandoned for decades. My dad always dismissed it as a useless, dusty relic of grandpa's eccentricity. And now, that was my inheritance? A forgotten building in Cleveland? Sophia burst out laughing. The workshop? Oh, that's perfect, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Little Becky always liked playing with computers in Grandpa's workshop. Now she gets to live her childhood dream, surrounded by junk. Aunt Victoria chimed in. There must be a mistake, Mr. Carter. William and Clara would never leave Rebecca with just that. But Mr. Carter shook his head. The will is quite clear. The workshop, including all contents and property, belongs solely to Rebecca. I couldn't move. I couldn't even speak. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I'd lost my parents, and now I was being handed a property everyone saw as worthless. Meanwhile, Sophia was practically swimming in wealth. Don't worry, Becky, Sophia said as she stood to leave. If you ever need help paying the bills, I'm sure we can arrange something. Her words stung like a slap, and her smirk stayed with me long after she walked out of the room. That night, I sat in my tiny Brooklyn apartment, staring at the manila envelope Mr. Carter had handed me. Inside was the deed to the workshop and a single key. I thought about tossing it all in the trash, but something stopped me. Memories of my grandfather filled my mind, his kind eyes, his patient voice as he explained his inventions to me, and the way he always said, Rebecca, you see what others miss. That's your gift. The next morning, I booked a one-way ticket to Cleveland. When I arrived, the workshop was even worse than I'd imagined. The building was old, with peeling paint and broken windows. Dust coated every surface, and the air smelled like rust and oil. I felt a pang of despair as I stood there, wondering why my parents would leave me this place. But as I walked through the workshop, I couldn't help but feel a strange connection. This was where Grandpa had spent his last years, working tirelessly on projects no one else understood. I noticed a wall at the back of the workshop that didn't seem right. The measurements didn't line up with the rest of the building. I remembered something Grandpa used to say when I was little. Always look closer, Rebecca. There's more to see than what's on the surface. My heart started racing as I ran my fingers along the wall, searching for something, anything. And then I found it. A panel that moved when I pressed it.
Click.
The wall swung open. Behind it was a hidden room, filled with blueprints, prototypes, and a locked safe. My breath caught in my throat. What was all this? Why had Grandpa hidden it? And more importantly, why had he left it for me? I had no idea what I was about to uncover, but one thing was certain. This workshop wasn't as worthless as everyone thought. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind was buzzing with questions and possibilities. What had Grandpa been working on? Why did he hide it? And why had he left it to me, of all people? As I stood in that hidden room, surrounded by his blueprints and prototypes, I realized that this wasn't just a forgotten space. It was a treasure chest, waiting to be opened. The first thing I noticed was the safe in the corner. It was an old-fashioned combination lock, the kind you'd expect to see in a movie. My fingers hesitated over the dial as I thought back to Grandpa. He'd always had a soft spot for me, even when no one else seemed to care. Then it hit me, my birthday. Grandpa never forgot it, even in his later years. I turned the dial, entering the numbers carefully.
Click.
The door swung open. Inside the safe was a leather-bound notebook and a small hard drive. I sat down on the dusty floor, holding the notebook like it was the most precious thing in the world. On the first page, written in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "To Rebecca, the only one who ever truly listened." I felt a lump in my throat as I turned the pages. The notebook was filled with sketches, equations, and notes about an invention I could barely begin to understand. It was some sort of artificial intelligence system, far beyond anything I'd seen before. Grandpa had developed a way to integrate machine learning with environmental sustainability. He called it Project Aurora. His notes detailed how this AI could revolutionize robotics, making them smarter, faster, and more eco-friendly. It wasn't just groundbreaking, it was years ahead of its time. The hard drive contained even more. Blueprints for prototypes, simulation data, and patent drafts that Grandpa had written but never filed. As I stared at the screen of my laptop, scrolling through his meticulous work, a sense of awe washed over me. This wasn't the work of a man who had lost his mind, as my father used to say. This was the work of a genius. But as the excitement grew, so did the fear. If Sophia or Aunt Victoria found out about this, they'd stop at nothing to take it from me. I knew how they operated. Sophia would hire the best lawyers, spin some story about how Grandpa's inventions should belong to the family estate. Aunt Victoria would back her up, using every ounce of her cunning to undermine me. I couldn't let that happen. Grandpa trusted me with this for a reason, and I wasn't going to let them destroy his legacy. I spent the next few weeks cleaning up the workshop, transforming it from a forgotten relic into a functional space. It wasn't easy. The roof leaked, the wiring was ancient, and the entire place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. But with every nail I hammered and every shelf I dusted, I felt closer to Grandpa. This was his space, and now it was mine. Once the workshop was ready, I started assembling a team. I knew I couldn't do this alone. The first person I called was Dr. Allen, a robotics engineer I'd met at a tech conference years ago. Back then, we'd bonded over our shared frustration with corporate greed and the lack of innovation in the industry. If anyone could help me bring Project Aurora to life, it was him. "Rebecca? Is that you?" he said when he answered the phone. "Yeah, it's me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need your help, Alan. It's big." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "How big?" "Big enough that it could change everything," I said. "But I need you to keep this absolutely confidential. No one can know, not yet." He agreed to meet me at the workshop the following week. When he arrived, his jaw practically hit the floor. "Rebecca," he said, staring at the blueprints spread across the table. "Do you have any idea what this is?" "That's what I was hoping you could tell me," I said with a small smile. Dr. Allen spent hours going through Grandpa's notes, muttering to himself and occasionally letting out an excited laugh. "This isn't just a breakthrough," he finally said, looking at me with wide eyes. "This is revolutionary. Your grandfather was light years ahead of his time. If we can get this working, well, let's just say the robotics industry will never be the same. Hearing those words lit a fire inside me. For so long, I'd felt like the family failure, the one who never quite measured up. But now, I had something they couldn't take away from me, something they couldn't dismiss. The next step was funding. I used my savings from years of working in software development to cover the basics, but I knew I'd need more if we were going to build the prototypes and file the patents. That's when I reached out to a few trusted friends in the tech industry. They believed in me when no one else did, and with their support, I was able to secure enough funding to get started. But I didn't stop there. I knew I had to protect Project Aurora from prying eyes. I set up a series of shell companies to keep my name off the radar. If anyone, including Sophia, tried to dig into what I was doing, all they'd find were dead ends. As the weeks turned into months, the workshop came alive. Dr. Allen brought in a small team of engineers, each of them carefully vetted for their discretion and expertise. The blueprints on Grandpa's hard drive became real, tangible prototypes. Every time I saw a robot arm move or a line of code come to life, I felt like I was honoring Grandpa's memory. But the closer we got to success, the more I felt the weight of what was at stake. Sophia's birthday was coming up, and I knew the whole family would be there. Part of me wanted to stay away, to keep my head down and focus on the work. But another part of me, the part that still remembered every cruel comment, every dismissive laugh, wanted to see her face when she realized what I was building. Little did I know, that birthday party would set everything into motion. I didn't want to go to Sophia's birthday party. The idea of sitting through another evening of her flaunting her wealth and achievements, while everyone else pretended she was the pinnacle of perfection, made my stomach turn. But something inside me told me I had to go. Maybe it was a small, petty part of me that wanted to see her face when she realized I wasn't the failure she thought I was. Or maybe it was just curiosity. Either way, I found myself standing in front of the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel in Manhattan, dressed in a simple navy dress I'd borrowed from a friend. The party was as over-the-top as I expected. Chandeliers glittered from the ceiling, a string quartet played softly in the corner, and waiters in crisp white shirts carried trays of champagne. Sophia was at the center of it all, wearing a custom gown that probably cost more than my annual rent. Her husband, Mark, a venture capitalist, was glued to her side, laughing at whatever she said like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. When Sophia spotted me, her eyes lit up with mock surprise. "Rebecca," she exclaimed, crossing the room to greet me. "I didn't think you'd come. What was it again?" "Oh, right, the workshop. Still digging through Grandpa's junk." I forced a smile. "It's actually been quite educational," I replied, keeping my tone light. "You'd be surprised at what I've found." Sophia raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Well, if you need help selling it off, Mark knows a guy who specializes in old properties. Just let us know." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to snap back. Let her think what she wants, I told myself. She'd find out soon enough. As the night went on, I kept my distance, sipping champagne and watching the room. It was the same crowd as always, wealthy, arrogant, and utterly oblivious to anyone outside their bubble. Aunt Victoria eventually cornered me, her sharp eyes scanning me like I was some sort of anomaly. "Rebecca," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "what are you working on these days? I heard you're still tinkering with Grandpa's little workshop. Shouldn't you be focusing on something more practical?" I met her gaze evenly. "Actually, I'm working on something that could be quite impactful," I said. "But I can't share the details yet. It's confidential." Aunt Victoria smirked. "Confidential? That's an interesting word for it." I didn't bother responding. She wasn't worth the energy. It wasn't until later in the evening that I decided to drop a small hint. Sophia was holding court near the dessert table, surrounded by her usual entourage. I walked over, casually joining the conversation. "Sophia," I said, cutting into whatever story she was telling, "how's the tech sector of your portfolio doing these days? I heard there's been some buzz about shortages in advanced robotics components. Must be tough for investors." Her smile faltered for a split second, just long enough for me to notice. Oh, it's fine, she said dismissively. I haven't really been keeping track. Why do you ask? I shrugged, hiding my grin behind a sip of champagne. No reason. Just curious. You might want to look into it, though. Things are changing quickly. I didn't stay much longer after that. The party was exhausting, and I had more important things to focus on. But as I left the hotel, I couldn't help but feel a spark of satisfaction. Sophia might not have understood what I was doing, but she could tell there was more to it than I was letting on. That was enough for now. The next morning, while Sophia and Mark were probably jetting off to some tropical island for a post-party vacation, we broke ground on our first official project. Dr. Allen and his team had been working tirelessly to finalize the prototype, and we were ready to move forward. The plan was simple: test the technology, secure partnerships, and file the patents before anyone could catch wind of what we were doing. It wasn't long before the first headlines appeared. Revolutionary AI technology disrupts robotics industry. The article detailed our advancements, calling it a game changer for manufacturing, automation, and environmental sustainability. I felt a surge of pride as I read it, knowing that we had finally brought Grandpa's vision to life. But the celebration was short-lived. Within days, my phone started ringing off the hook. Aunt Victoria, Sophia, and even Mark were calling, leaving message after message. They'd seen the article, and now they wanted answers. Rebecca, Sophia's voice said on one of the voicemails, her usual confidence replaced with a hint of desperation. Why didn't you tell us about this? We're family. We could have helped. Helped? The same way they'd helped by mocking me and dismissing everything I'd ever tried to do? I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to face them yet. Instead, I focused on securing the next steps. Contracts with major robotics firms were finalized, and investors were lining up to get a piece of what we were building. Our valuation skyrocketed, and within a matter of months, Miller AI Innovations was worth over $2 billion. Grandpa's dream was finally becoming a reality. But I knew it wasn't over. Sophia and Aunt Victoria weren't the type to back down easily. They'd come for me, sooner or later. And when they did, I'd be ready. I knew it was only a matter of time before Sophia and Aunt Victoria confronted me. The article in the press had shaken them, and the realization that I'd built something extraordinary without their help or knowledge must have felt like a slap in the face. I didn't answer their calls or messages. I was too busy solidifying everything Grandpa and I had worked for. But when Aunt Victoria insisted on an emergency family meeting, I decided it was time to face them. The meeting was held at the family's old Manhattan penthouse, the same one Sophia now lived in. Walking through those doors felt surreal. The place was as opulent as ever, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but it no longer felt like home. It was a monument to everything I'd left behind. Sophia was waiting in the living room, dressed impeccably as always, but there was tension in her posture. Aunt Victoria sat next to her, a legal pad in hand, her face a mask of sharp determination. Mark was there too, leaning against the fireplace, arms crossed. It was like walking into a courtroom, and I was the one on trial. Rebecca, Sophia began, forcing a smile. Thank you for coming. We've been trying to reach you. I noticed, I said evenly, sitting down on one of the plush armchairs. What's this about? Sophia's smile wavered. It's about the technology you've been working on. The company. I interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Yes, Aunt Victoria cut in, her tone clipped. We feel that Grandpa's inventions and anything developed from them should rightfully belong to the family estate. He created those ideas while he was still a part of this family, and they're a shared legacy. I stared at her, trying to suppress my anger. You mean the same legacy that you and Sophia dismissed as junk? The same workshop you mocked me for inheriting? Sophia shifted uncomfortably. We didn't know what was in there. If we had, things would have been different. Exactly, Aunt Victoria said, seizing the opening. You've been withholding valuable assets from the family, Rebecca. That's unethical and possibly illegal. I couldn't help but laugh. Unethical? You're accusing me of being unethical? You two have spent your entire lives chasing wealth without a second thought for the people you trample along the way. And now that I've built something on my own, you think you can swoop in and take it? It's not about taking it. Sophia said quickly. It's about fairness. Dad would have wanted us to share in this. We're family, Rebecca. That word, family, hit me harder than it should have. I'd spent years trying to prove my worth to them, trying to belong in a family that had always treated me like an outsider. But not anymore. I pulled Grandpa's notebook out of my bag and placed it on the coffee table. Do you know what this is? I asked, my voice calm but firm. Sophia and Aunt Victoria leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the notebook. It's Grandpa's journal, I continued. Every idea, every blueprint, every prototype, it's all here. He left it for me.
Not you.
Not the estate.
Me.
Because he believed in me when no one else did. I flipped to a marked page and read aloud. To Rebecca, you're the only one who ever truly listened. You saw value where others saw waste, and that's why I'm leaving this to you. I know you'll make something of it. I looked up, meeting their stunned faces. This was his choice, not mine. Sophia's composure cracked, and she leaned forward, her voice desperate. Rebecca, we can still work something out. We can be partners. We can… No, I said sharply, cutting her off. We can't. I gave you a chance to believe in me, and you chose to mock me instead. You're only here now because you see dollar signs, not because you care about Grandpa's legacy or me. Aunt Victoria tried to interject, but I held up a hand. And don't think I haven't prepared for this, I added, my voice steely. Grandpa's will explicitly states that everything in the workshop belongs to me, including the intellectual property. I've already filed the patents, and I've made sure they're ironclad. Legally, there's nothing you can do. The room fell silent. Sophia looked like she wanted to argue, but she knew I was right. Mark avoided my gaze, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. I stood up, picking up the notebook. You always told me I was the disappointment of the family, I said, looking directly at Sophia. But the truth is, I'm the one who saw value where you saw nothing. And now, I'm the one who's built something real. Something that matters. As I walked to the door, Aunt Victoria called after me. Your parents would be ashamed of how selfish you're being. I paused, turning back to face them. No, I said quietly. They'd be ashamed they never saw what Grandpa saw in me. And that's their loss, just like this is yours. Today, Miller AI Innovations is worth over $4 billion. We've partnered with some of the biggest names in technology, and our advancements in robotics are shaping the future. The workshop in Cleveland has been transformed into a state-of-the-art facility, but I kept Grandpa's hidden room exactly as it was, a reminder of where it all began. As for Sophia and Aunt Victoria, they've tried to reconcile a few times, usually when they need something. I don't hold any grudges, but I also don't let them back into my life. Instead, I've focused on using my success to help others, creating opportunities for people like me, people who were overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. They say revenge is sweet, but I've learned something even sweeter, proving that true worth isn't in what you inherit, but in what you create. And that, more than anything, is the legacy Grandpa wanted me to carry forward. After the tragic death of my parents, my cruel mother-in-law treated me like a slave. During a family gathering, she called me a poor abandoned girl, and my husband laughed at me. Then, suddenly, an old wealthy man entered the venue and said, "Embrace me, my daughter." Everyone was stunned. But when he delivered his next shocking surprise, my husband and mother-in-law were on their knees. My name is Lisa, and my life has been anything but ordinary. Growing up in Denver, Colorado, I used to think my world was perfect. But everything changed when I was just 8 years old. A fire swept through our home one night while we were all asleep. The flames swallowed everything. The walls, the furniture, and worst of all, my parents. I can still hear their voices calling out to me through the smoke, but I never saw them again. That night, my entire life burned to ashes, leaving me with nothing but questions and pain. With no family to take me in, I was placed in the foster care system. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. I thought someone would come for me, a grandparent, an aunt, maybe even a family friend. But nobody came. I was just a little girl, abandoned and alone, moving from one foster home to another. Each family was different, but none of them felt like home. Some were kind, others indifferent, and a few downright cold. For 5 years, I lived that way, never settling, always hoping for something better. That something better finally came when I was 13. A couple, the Carters, visited the group home I was staying at. They weren't like the other people I'd met before. Mr. Carter had a warm, fatherly smile, and Mrs. Carter's eyes sparkled with kindness. They owned a thriving technology business in Denver, and though they were incredibly successful, they seemed down to earth. When they chose to adopt me, I couldn't believe it. For the first time in years, I had parents again, people who loved me and wanted me to succeed. Life with the Carters was like stepping into a different world. Their house was enormous, with rooms I didn't even know what to do with. But more than the material comforts, they gave me love, guidance, and security. They encouraged me to dream big and always reminded me that I was capable of achieving anything. Despite their wealth, they taught me the value of hard work and humility. I worked hard in school and managed to get a full scholarship to a prestigious college in Boulder, where I studied environmental science. It was there during my sophomore year that I met Jack. He was studying engineering and we had a few mutual friends. Jack was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: charming, funny, and endlessly supportive. He had this way of making me feel special, like I was the only person in the room. One day, after class, Jack came up to me and said, "Lisa, I've noticed you're always the first one to ask questions during lectures. What's your secret? Do you have a time machine or something?" I laughed, and that was the start of everything. We began spending time together, studying, grabbing coffee, and talking about everything from our favorite movies to our biggest dreams. Jack told me he came from a wealthy family in Chicago. His parents, Amanda and Robert, owned several luxury hotels and were known for their glamorous parties and high society connections. "They're a little particular about people," Jack admitted once when we were talking about our families. At the time, I didn't think much of it. After all, Jack seemed different, grounded, and kind. As our relationship grew, I hesitated to tell Jack about my past. I didn't want to be seen as the poor abandoned girl he needed to save. So I avoided the topic, focusing instead on the life I was building with him. By the time we graduated, Jack and I were inseparable. He proposed during a hike in the Rockies, and I said yes, without hesitation. I believed we could handle anything as long as we were together. But reality has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. The first crack in our perfect world appeared when Jack wanted me to meet his parents. I was excited but also nervous. Jack warned me, "They can be tough. Just be yourself and everything will be fine." I tried to push my worries aside, reminding myself that Jack loved me and that his parents' opinions didn't matter. The dinner was held at one of their luxury hotels in Chicago. The moment I walked in, I felt like I didn't belong. The room was filled with chandeliers, polished floors, and people dressed in designer clothes. Amanda greeted me with a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes, while Robert barely acknowledged me. Throughout the evening, they spoke only to Jack, treating me as if I were invisible. When Amanda finally addressed me, her words were sharp. "So, Lisa," she said, swirling her wine glass, "Jack tells us you studied on a scholarship. Impressive. But I assume that's because there wasn't much of a family fortune to fall back on, was theirs?" I felt my cheeks burn, but I forced a polite smile. "I've been fortunate to have great support from my adoptive parents," I replied, trying to steer the conversation to safer ground. Amanda's expression hardened. "Adoptive parents, you say? How charitable of them." Jack's silence during the exchange stung more than Amanda's words. I had always thought he would defend me, but instead, he stared down at his plate, avoiding my gaze. As we left the dinner, I couldn't hold back my tears. "Jack, why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I didn't want to make a scene," he replied, looking uncomfortable. "They'll come around. Just give them time." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a storm I wasn't prepared for. I tried to convince myself that Jack was right, that his parents just needed time to get to know me. But deep down, I felt uneasy. Amanda and Robert's disapproving stares and veiled comments replayed in my mind. I told myself to be patient, to focus on the love Jack and I shared. But patience can only take you so far when you're constantly made to feel small. The weeks after that dinner were tense. Jack began spending more time on work projects, and I felt like I was losing the connection we once had. I tried talking to him about how his parents made me feel, but his responses were always the same. It's just how they are, Lisa. Don't take it personally. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one being judged. When his parents hosted another dinner, this time at their estate in Chicago, Jack insisted we attend. It's important to them, Lisa. They want us to be part of the family, he said. I reluctantly agreed, hoping this could be an opportunity to mend things. Walking into their sprawling mansion, I felt out of place again. The walls were adorned with expensive art, the kind you'd only see in galleries. As Amanda greeted us, her icy demeanor returned. Lisa, she said with a forced smile, how nice of you to join us. Her tone made it clear it wasn't nice at all. Throughout the evening, Amanda and Robert barely acknowledged me. When they did, it was only to make pointed remarks. You know, Amanda said at one point, her voice dripping with sarcasm, Jack has always had such exquisite taste. It's surprising, isn't it? I wanted to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Jack, as usual, said nothing. Later that night, I pulled Jack aside. Why don't you ever stand up for me? I demanded, my voice trembling. Do you not see how they treat me? Jack sighed, clearly frustrated. Lisa, you're reading too much into it. They're just traditional. They'll warm up eventually. Traditional? I snapped. They called me Charity. How much more obvious can they make it that they don't want me here? Jack ran a hand through his hair. I love you, Lisa. Isn't that enough? I didn't answer, because in that moment, I wasn't sure if it was. Weeks turned into months, and things didn't improve. If anything, they got worse. Jack's parents hosted a grand anniversary party, inviting hundreds of their high society friends. When Jack asked me to come, I hesitated. Do you really want me there? I asked. Of course, he said, almost offended. You're my fiancé. The party was held at a luxury ballroom in downtown Chicago. From the moment we arrived, it was clear I wasn't welcome. Guests whispered behind their champagne glasses, giving me sideways glances. I tried to stay close to Jack, but he was swept away in conversations with his parents and their friends. Every time I tried to join a group, I was met with cold stares or outright dismissal. By the time Amanda and Robert gave their anniversary speech, I was holding back tears. They thanked everyone for being an important part of their lives, pointedly excluding me. Then came the jokes, thinly veiled insults aimed directly at me. Jack has always had a soft spot for projects, Amanda quipped, causing laughter to ripple through the room. I felt like I was shrinking, like every eye in the room was on me, mocking me. Unable to take it anymore, I quietly left the party. I ordered a rideshare and cried the entire way home. When Jack came back later that night, he was furious. Do you know how embarrassing that was for me? He shouted. For you? I shot back. What about me? Do you know how humiliating it was to be laughed at in front of all those people? You could have just stayed and dealt with it, he said, his tone sharp. It was one night, Lisa. Couldn't you have done that for me? I stared at him, stunned. This wasn't the Jack I fell in love with. Your parents humiliated me, Jack. And instead of standing up for me, you're blaming me for leaving? They're my parents, he said firmly. You don't just walk out on them. I felt a crack deep inside me, like something fundamental between us had broken. I slept on the couch that night, too hurt to even look at him. The following weeks were a blur of silence and tension. Jack continued attending his parents' weekly family dinners, but I stayed home. Every time he left, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I knew I was losing him, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my dignity for a relationship that felt increasingly one-sided. One evening, after another family dinner, Jack came home with a smug expression. My parents expect an apology from you, he said, crossing his arms. An apology? I repeated, incredulous. For what? For embarrassing them at the party, he said matter-of-factly. And while you're at it, I think I deserve one too. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They insulted me, Jack. They insulted us. And you think I should apologize? Yes, he said, his voice firm. It's the least you can do to make things right. Something inside me snapped. I'm done, I said quietly. I can't do this anymore. What do you mean? Jack asked, his voice softening. I mean, I can't keep pretending this is okay, I replied. I can't keep fighting for someone who won't fight for me. Jack didn't respond. He just stared at me, as if he didn't know the woman standing in front of him. That night, I called my parents. Through tears, I told them everything. We'll take care of it, my dad said, his voice steady. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a small glimmer of hope. I'll never forget the phone call I had with my parents that night. I poured out all the pain I'd been holding in, the insults, the judgment, and Jack's complete lack of support. My dad, calm and thoughtful as always, listened quietly before saying, Lisa, no one has the right to treat you this way. You deserve better, and we'll make sure they understand that. I didn't know what he meant at the time, but I trusted him. My parents had always been my rock, and I knew they wouldn't let me face this alone. A few days later, they arrived in Chicago. Seeing them again was like taking a deep breath after being underwater for too long. My mom hugged me tightly, and my dad gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. We're here for you, my mom said firmly. And it's time we set some things straight. My parents and I spent the next few days together, talking and planning. They made it clear that this wasn't just about standing up to Jack's family, it was about me reclaiming my self-worth. Lisa, you've worked so hard to build a life for yourself, my dad said. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're less than what you are. When I told them about the weekly family dinners Jack's parents hosted, my dad's eyes lit up.
Perfect, he said.
We'll join them this week. I hesitated. Are you sure that's a good idea? I asked. The thought of my parents confronting Amanda and Robert made me nervous. Trust us, my mom said. They need to see the real Lisa, the Lisa we know and love. The dinner was scheduled at an exclusive restaurant downtown. Jack had gone ahead without me, as usual, but this time, I didn't stay home. Dressed in a simple but elegant outfit, I walked into the restaurant with my parents by my side. The moment we approached the table, all conversation stopped. Amanda and Robert froze, their faces a mixture of shock and discomfort. Good evening, my dad said smoothly, his tone polite but firm. I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Mr. Carter, Lisa's father. This is my wife. Amanda's smile was tight and strained. Oh, Mr. Carter. What a surprise, she said, her voice faltering. We didn't realize you were in town. We thought it was time we met, my mom said, her eyes narrowing slightly. After all, you've had so much to say about our daughter. Robert cleared his throat awkwardly. It's, good to meet you. Jack didn't mention you'd be coming. I'm sure he didn't, my dad replied, taking a seat. But we're here now, and there are some things we need to discuss. Jack looked like he wanted to disappear. He avoided my gaze, fiddling with his napkin as my dad turned to Amanda and Robert. I understand you've had concerns about Lisa, he said. I'd like to hear them. Amanda's composure cracked for just a moment before she recovered. We've simply been trying to ensure that Jack's future is secure, she said. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal, my mom echoed, her voice sharp. Calling her a poor abandoned girl isn't personal? Amanda flushed. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, my dad interrupted. But let me set the record straight. Lisa is our daughter, and she's been part of a family far stronger and more successful than you seem to realize. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a portfolio, placing it on the table. Inside were documents detailing the Carter family business, its growth, its partnerships, and its considerable wealth. Amanda and Robert exchanged stunned looks as they skimmed the papers. You judged Lisa without knowing anything about her, my dad continued. You assumed she wasn't good enough for your son because of where she came from. But let me tell you, Lisa's worth isn't tied to wealth or status. It's tied to her strength, her kindness, and her integrity, qualities I'm not sure this family understands. Amanda tried to speak, but my mom cut her off. You've made Lisa feel like an outsider, but the truth is, she's out of your league. And now that you know the truth, I hope you'll think twice before passing judgment on someone you don't know. My dad then turned to Jack, his expression cold. Lisa asked me to give you this, he said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside were the divorce papers I had signed earlier that day. Jack looked up at me, his eyes wide. Lisa, he said, his voice breaking. We can fix this. No, Jack, I said, my voice steady. You had your chance to fix it. But every time your family tore me down, you stood by and said nothing. I deserve better than that. For the first time, I felt free. As my parents and I stood to leave, Amanda and Robert remained silent, their faces pale. Jack didn't follow me, and I didn't look back. Walking out of that restaurant with my parents felt like shedding a weight I'd carried for far too long. For the first time in years, I could breathe. As we drove away, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt relief. My dad glanced at me in the rearview mirror. How do you feel, Lisa? He asked gently.
Free, I said.
And I meant it. The days following that dinner were a whirlwind. Jack signed the divorce papers without hesitation. Part of me thought he might fight for us, but I guess I already knew the answer. He had made his choice long ago. Every time he stood silent while his family tore me apart. His parents, however, weren't as accepting of the situation. They bombarded me with messages, some angry, others pleading. Tell your dad to back off, one text from Amanda read. He's ruining us. It didn't take long for my dad's influence to take effect. My parents' company had strong ties with several of the investors and partners that Robert and Amanda relied on for their hotel business. One by one, those partnerships dissolved. The family empire they had built on arrogance and elitism began to crumble, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. I didn't feel guilty. They had mocked me for being a poor abandoned girl, and now they were learning what it felt like to be powerless. Meanwhile, my life was starting to take a new shape. My parents insisted on taking me on a trip to California, a much-needed escape from the chaos of the past few months. We spent days walking along sunny beaches, hiking through breathtaking trails, and talking late into the night. It was exactly what I needed to heal. My mom reminded me constantly that I was loved, and my dad encouraged me to think about my future. You're strong, Lisa, he said one evening as we watched the sun set over the ocean. And this is just the beginning for you. He was right. The experience with Jack and his family had taught me so much about myself. I realized how much I had sacrificed to make a relationship work with someone who didn't truly value me. It wasn't just about Jack's silence or his parents' cruelty. It was about my own belief that I had to prove my worth to people who would never see it. I promised myself I would never let that happen again. When we returned to Denver, I focused on rebuilding my life. I moved into a new apartment, started a job with an environmental nonprofit, and reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. My parents continued to support me every step of the way, always reminding me that I was never alone. As for Jack and his family, I didn't hear much about them after the divorce was finalized. I did learn through mutual acquaintances that their financial troubles continued to worsen, and their lavish lifestyle became less sustainable. Part of me thought I'd feel satisfaction in hearing that, but in truth, I didn't care. I was too busy moving forward to dwell on their downfall. Looking back now, I see that chapter of my life as both painful and transformative. Betrayal cuts deep, especially when it comes from someone you thought would always stand by you. But resilience runs deeper. I found strength in my pain and turned it into something powerful, a new beginning, a fresh start. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: self-respect is not negotiable. You can't force someone to see your worth, and you shouldn't have to. The people who truly care for you will never make you question it. My parents taught me that, and for that, I will always be grateful. Today, I'm proud of the person I've become. I've left behind the toxic relationships and the need for validation from others. My story isn't one of defeat, it's one of triumph. And as I stand here, looking ahead to the future, I know that the best is yet to come.
Wait, you're sleeping there? I exclaimed in surprise. Currently, I was house sitting for my brother and his wife while they were on a trip, accompanied by my niece, Emily, in my brother's house. Despite the absence of her parents, Emily seemed unusually insistent on not having my daughter, Alice, over, even though we had planned for a day of fun together. Instead, we spent the evening playing games and preparing dinner. As the night progressed, Emily's behavior became increasingly peculiar. She stuck close to me, her eyes darting around the room as if she were on guard against an invisible threat. When I finally confronted her about her strange demeanor, she insisted that everything was fine, although her actions suggested otherwise. When bedtime arrived, Emily surprised me by opening the closet door, revealing a neatly prepared set of bedding. Without hesitation, she crawled into the closet and lay down on the mattress inside. Stunned, I blurted out, "Wait, Emily, you're sleeping in there?" With a serious expression, she reassured me, "Yes, but it's okay. I'll leave it slightly open. If anything happens, I'll wake up right away." Attempting to conceal my bewilderment, I tentatively proposed, "Why don't we sleep together tonight?" After some persuasion, Emily reluctantly agreed and climbed into my bed. She inquired if it was permissible to keep the bedding in the closet, her chosen hiding spot. Although it only deepened the mystery, I consented. Curiosity piqued, I asked, "Why do you need a hiding place?" Emily, after extracting a promise from me not to laugh, whispered her response, "The monster is coming." Initially, I found her fear endearing, akin to a child's imaginative tale. However, the story that unfolded next shattered my skepticism. Emily trembled, clutching my arm. "The monster is very scary and clever. It only comes when Daddy is not here. Mommy says I can't leave the closet until she has driven the monster away. She always cries while she's doing it." I tried to help her once, but it was too scary when it pounded on the closet door. As I held the frightened Emily close, a sinking realization settled in. The monster, it seemed, was real. I was caught off guard by my sister-in-law's affair, and suddenly, her unfaithfulness seemed to manifest as this ominous presence in their lives. The evidence was before me. Emily's father's absence, her aversion to my daughter's presence, her watchful eyes on the windows and the front door. It all pointed to her genuine fear. My heart ached for sweet Emily and for my brother, who trusted his wife implicitly. Anger boiled within me, but my immediate concern was to reassure Emily. Gripping her hand, I offered a reassuring smile. "It's okay because Aunt Lily is here today. The monster is clever, right? Maybe it won't come in because it sees a stranger. And your mom, who's usually targeted, is with your dad today, so the monster can't approach her." Yet despite my attempts to comfort her, Emily's anxiety persisted and grew with each passing moment. In an effort to help her confront her fears, I suggested hiding in the closet together, urging her to talk openly about the monster. However, as Emily revealed another alarming detail, my concern deepened. Unable to contain my apprehension, I found myself rushing out of the house with Emily, still clad in her pajamas, desperate to protect her from the impending threat. In a rush, I drove back home and explained the unsettling situation to my husband, who promptly headed to my brother's house with his friends in tow. Around 10 p.m. that night, as they arrived at my brother's place, I received a call from my brother, who was still on vacation, inquiring about Emily's well-being. "Did Emily go to bed? Forget about your husband and daughter. Get some rest yourself. Make sure to lock the doors, okay? Good night," he'd advised sternly before hanging up, emphasizing the need for security and rest. After assuring him about Emily, I looked at her, peacefully sleeping beside my daughter, and made a silent vow to protect her from the unseen menace. The following morning, my husband returned after staying the night at my brother's house. His account of the previous night's events filled me with a mixture of fear and anger, validating my decision to leave my brother's house. Throughout the day, I remained at home with Emily and my family, awaiting my brother and his wife's arrival to collect their daughter. When they finally saw us, my brother's immediate reaction was accusatory, demanding why Emily and I had left the house against his instructions. "Why didn't you guys stay at the other house?" I told you repeatedly not to leave our home. What were you thinking, going back to your own place after agreeing not to?" he protested vehemently. Sensing something amiss, I calmly questioned my brother about how he knew we weren't at his house while he was away. He hesitantly revealed that he had given Emily a smartphone with GPS functionality. However, his explanation seemed inconsistent, given his earlier insistence over the phone that we shouldn't leave. I decided to press further, questioning my brother about two unfamiliar men who had visited my house late at night. His demeanor changed, his voice shaky, and his eyes avoided mine as he attempted to provide an explanation. Before I could delve deeper, my sister-in-law intervened, forcefully calling Emily over and urging her to leave. In an abrupt shift, my brother, while still upset, started pushing Emily towards the door, attempting to take her back home with them. I protested vehemently, trying to prevent them from leaving, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. Emily, clearly distressed, reached out to me, and I instinctively pulled her behind me, shielding her from their insistent grasp. "Hey, we're not done talking yet," I called out, my voice determined, refusing to let them take Emily away without addressing the mounting questions and concerns that clouded the air. "What do you think you're doing?" My sister-in-law's voice rose in surprise, and she released Emily's hand. However, I kept Emily protected behind me, away from my brother and his wife. They hurled aggressive words at us and charged forward, fueled by anger. My husband and I were resolute in our determination not to let them take Emily, managing to force them out of the room. At the front door, waiting police officers swiftly apprehended my brother and his wife. The officers attempted to calm the disoriented couple, clearly caught off guard by the turn of events. In response, my brother argued, "If you don't give us back our daughter, then you should be the ones getting detained." My sister-in-law added, "They took our daughter from home and locked her up here. Please save Emily right away. You shouldn't be holding me back. I won't run or hide, so let me go," my brother shouted in frustration. Emily and my daughter, who had noticed the commotion and come out, were talking behind me, looking surprised. My daughter innocently remarked, "She doesn't seem locked up at all." I wasn't sure if my brother heard her, but he turned to Emily and commanded her to come to him in a strong tone. However, the severity of her father's demeanor scared her, and she refused to leave my side. My sister-in-law stood silently by the police officer, just watching my brother, not attempting to call Emily over. Enraged that things weren't going his way, my brother continued to yell in the entrance, completely restrained by the police officer. Witnessing this, my husband pushed his smartphone in front of my brother's face. Noticing this, I told Emily and my daughter to wait once more in the other room and shut the door so they wouldn't hear the audio. After confirming this, my husband started playing a video he had recorded at my brother's house the night before without uttering a word. The video began with a key slowly turning in the lock of the house. It seemed they had used a spare key. Two men quietly entered the room, their faces filled with anticipation. They greeted each other, mentioning my brother's name. "Didn't know we had company. Hey, how much did you pay?" One of them smirked, eyeing my husband and his friends. When my husband's friend gave a vague response, avoiding the question, one of the men boasted that because they were good friends with my brother and his wife, they got an even bigger discount, mentioning a specific amount. They continued, "We're lucky we get to play with the kids today." The man's laughter was sinister. I couldn't see the screen, but the audio alone was enough to make my skin crawl. Afterwards, my husband's friend bombarded the men with questions, asking if they often came to this house and if they always came as a pair. Sensing something was off, the men asked where Emily and I were. Seeing my husband's enraged expression as he responded that we weren't there, the men finally realized the gravity of the situation. Realizing they weren't among friends, the men quickly fled. Until the very end, they were either unaware of my husband's recording or deliberately didn't mention it. My brother, supposed to be their close acquaintance, seemed to have discovered the existence of the video for the first time and was visibly shaken. Now deathly pale, he frantically stated, "I didn't know anything. I've been framed." Upon watching the incriminating video, my assumption that my brother was innocent and my sister-in-law was the mastermind crumbled. The footage provided undeniable proof of my brother's involvement in offering up Emily and me. His feigned ignorance wouldn't deceive anyone. My brother was taken away by the police, while my sister-in-law pretended to be clueless about the situation. However, the police officer, having already heard Emily's testimony, asked her to accompany him for further questioning. Consequently, they both ended up in custody together. In subsequent police interrogations, my brother and his wife confessed to everything and were arrested. It was revealed that my sister-in-law lured men into their home on nights when my brother worked late shifts, exploiting Emily discreetly to meet the demand for children in certain circles. Emily, unaware of the sinister nature, posed as instructed, thinking she was helping her bullied mother. The innocent photos of Emily were manipulated by my sister-in-law. She developed the images and displayed them to customers, creating a bidding frenzy as if in an auction. Shockingly, she never sold the photos. She only lent them out. While this nefarious business had nothing to do with my husband and me, my brother, upon discovering his wife's illicit dealings, didn't reprimand her or protect his daughter. Unbelievably, he started gathering more customers, thinking it would increase revenue. With a twisted rationale, he coerced me into this horrid business, threatening me by capturing images of the scene. One day, when the neighbors were absent, they locked Emily and me in their house, exchanged the spare key for a hefty sum of money, and left town for an overnight trip, all to establish an alibi. However, what they didn't anticipate was Emily's courage. She had always obeyed my sister-in-law unquestioningly, but to protect me, she confided in me about the monsters, unknowingly shedding light on their nightmarish situation. That evening, upon learning about Emily's ordeal, I asked my husband to capture the images of these so-called monsters. The police swiftly acted on the information we provided. When we reported the situation, the police officer ensured Emily's safety from my brother and his wife. Subsequently, my brother and his wife were arrested on grave charges, including violations of child welfare laws and laws preventing child exploitation. Despite being first-time offenders, they couldn't escape imprisonment. The photos of Emily, taken over several years, were deemed highly malicious. Once an image was leaked on the internet, it could never be erased. I was utterly shocked when the police revealed this information to me. Fortunately, my sister-in-law hadn't digitized or sold Emily's photos, keeping them securely stored and preventing any leakage. The fact that my brother, who had always been kind and reliable, could turn into such a terrible person terrified me. Until that moment, we had been helping each other as we always had. The realization that I hadn't noticed this dark side of him haunted me. Regardless, I wanted them to face the consequences of their actions. After my brother and his wife were arrested, the individuals referred to as the monsters were also brought in for questioning by the police. They attempted to claim their innocence, arguing that their plans hadn't succeeded, and therefore they weren't guilty. However, the discovery of another child's photographs at their residence and the involvement in additional criminal acts, confessed by my brother and his wife during their interrogations, led to their arrest on multiple charges. Once we had dealt with the monsters that had plagued our lives, we visited Child Protective Services to inquire about Emily's situation. With her parents arrested, Emily was left without anyone to care for her. In truth, her parents were unfit guardians from the start, so custody of Emily was rightfully taken away from my brother and his wife. Neither my brother nor I had any living parents, and my sister-in-law's family was entirely estranged. We discovered that if no one from her family agreed to take her in, Emily would be placed with foster parents. After discussing it with my husband, we decided to adopt Emily. To me, Emily was not only someone I felt deeply indebted to, but also a girl I had grown to love as my own daughter. The mere thought of leaving her was unbearable. Thankfully, my husband agreed, and we viewed this as an opportunity to move to my in-laws' town. Our daughter, who adored her grandparents and had always longed for an older sister, was overjoyed. She eagerly anticipated the weekends when she could see her grandparents more frequently. Now, her dream of having Emily, whom she adored as a big sister, had come true. As for Emily, who had finally escaped the clutches of her abusive parents, she adapted remarkably well to her new environment as an older sister. It was incredible to witness the resilience of children. She was gradually embracing a happier and more peaceful life. Bear with me as I provide the necessary context. I am a 26-year-old male who has always been close to my family. I used to live with my parents and older sister until I turned 18 and left for college. Growing up, I despised our hometown and longed to escape its confines. The only thing that ever brought me back was my family. They were my anchor. Even after my sister moved out, I would occasionally return and stay with her in her separate apartment whenever I visited town. We shared a deep bond, having confided in each other since childhood. However, my world shattered when my sister revealed her engagement news. What made this revelation even more painful was the identity of her fiancé, the very person who had tormented me throughout high school. Bullied felt like an understatement. He had subjected me to relentless torment, pushing me to the point of panic attacks and multiple emergency room visits. I had made official complaints against him, but he always managed to evade consequences. My parents and sister were aware of my ordeal. They tried their best to help, but the scars ran deep. The shock of my sister's engagement was overwhelming, feeling like an outright betrayal. I couldn't fathom how she could be with someone who had caused me such immense suffering. In that moment, I couldn't even look at her. I fled our parents' house, desperate to escape the suffocating grip of panic. I spent that night in a hotel, ignoring frantic calls and messages from my family. The next day, I decided to face my family, knowing they must be worried sick about me. I reassured them that I was physically fine, although emotionally shattered. My sister began to explain how she reconnected with her fiancé after returning to town. She claimed he had apologized for his past behavior, a hollow gesture considering the horrors he had put me through. What stunned me even more was the revelation that they had been together for over 3 years, a period during which she never mentioned him. I felt a surge of betrayal as I realized she had shared her life with my tormentor while keeping me in the dark. When my parents expressed their disapproval, I felt a glimmer of hope that they would understand my pain. To my relief, they sided with me, questioning my sister's judgment. She grew defensive, urging us to move on from the past, a plea I found utterly absurd given the trauma he had inflicted on me. She expected me to tolerate his presence at family gatherings, but I couldn't. I bluntly told her she couldn't marry him, regardless of how irrational or stubborn I sounded. I found it unimaginable to accept him as a part of my family. When I confronted my sister, she adamantly refused to end her engagement, dismissing our conflict as a petty feud. Her words cut deep, especially considering she knew the extent of my suffering. Realizing I couldn't change her mind, I gave her a straightforward ultimatum. She had to choose between her fiancé and me. I couldn't bear to be a part of her life if she married him. She argued that my demand was unfair, professing her love for me. I acknowledged the truth in her words, but I simply couldn't fathom having that man in our lives. In the end, she chose him, tearfully explaining that she didn't want to make this choice, but felt compelled to. I told her I loved her, but declared that she would never see me again. I wished her well and walked away. Over the years, my parents kept me updated on her life events, including her wedding and the birth of my twin nephews. Despite my desire to meet the children, I couldn't bring myself to do so. Several years passed without any contact from my sister until one unexpected day when she called me. I picked up, concerned that something might be wrong. Strangely calm, she expressed her longing to reconnect. I admitted missing her too, but I reiterated my unwavering stance regarding her husband. She proposed that he would apologize if given a chance and insisted they both wanted me back in their lives. Despite my reservations, she urged me to meet my nephews. Caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, I hesitated. Before I could respond, she revealed her immediate need for help babysitting the kids, emphasizing that I was her only reliable option. Feeling cornered, I questioned my reliability as I had never even met her children. She assured me they were prepared to apologize and reconcile, emphasizing the importance of having their uncle in their lives. Feeling overwhelmed, I asked for time to think. I admitted my desire to meet my nephews, but expressed my discomfort with suddenly being entrusted to babysit kids I had never met before. I told her to give me space, promising to revisit the conversation later. I grappled with my decision, wondering if I was wrong for not wanting to babysit my nephews due to my unresolved issues with her husband. Feeling guilty about declining my sister's request, I sought solace in a conversation with my parents. They reassured me that, while they accepted my sister and her kids, they couldn't embrace her husband into the family. Their support meant the world to me. Opening up to them about my dilemma, I expressed my remorse for not helping my sister. That's when they disclosed that she had recently lost her job, causing financial strain. It became clear they were struggling and needed a free babysitter, with me being the first choice. I inquired about her husband's situation and why he couldn't assist. My parents revealed he had never held a job for more than 3 months, and his family had cut ties due to fights. Oddly satisfying was the realization that my high school bully had become a non-contributing member of society. While my parents advised against babysitting, the final decision lay with me. Despite my initial determination to help, I wrestled with the fact that my sister only contacted me out of necessity. It felt incredibly selfish, making me wonder if her husband's influence was at play. The internal struggle persisted since her call, but ultimately, I knew I couldn't accept her offer. Summoning the courage, I called my sister to decline, even though I felt compelled to apologize. She questioned my refusal, prompting me to explain that being near her husband triggered painful memories. She grew upset, accusing me of dwelling in the past and being stubborn. I firmly told her she didn't know the whole story, emphasizing her lack of right to judge my decision. She coldly told me to stop whining about a little bullying and move on. I was seething with anger because she had witnessed my panic attacks caused by her husband. I confided in her about my suicide attempt, something our parents had kept from her because she was away at college at the time. After hearing the full extent of my pain, she was left speechless. I laid out the reasons why I couldn't be near him and accused her of being insensitive for forcing me into that situation. She promptly apologized, but it fell flat for me. I felt like her apology came too late. She should have supported me long before knowing the truth. Reminding her that she'd chosen her husband when I asked her to decide, I told her she needed to let me go. She couldn't have everything and everyone. I couldn't understand why she would marry such a horrible person after everything he had put me through. To me, both she and her husband were reprehensible. She should have stood by me, making her equally culpable. I commended our parents for standing by my side all this time. Now, shifting to our second story, my closest friend is getting married in Sicily this August with less than a year's notice. I was asked to be a bridesmaid, but I'm starting to feel unappreciated. Despite their wealth, my friend, who doesn't currently work, has invited people from all over the world. My little sister was uninvited due to guest list cuts. They chose a 5-star hotel for the venue, expecting guests to pay for their own accommodations from Thursday to Monday. Moreover, there's a Shabbat dinner, but the bridal party isn't invited because there's not enough space. When I raised concerns, the bride shrugged it off, saying it wasn't a priority for her fiancé, who cited the cost. She later posted about services being available at a price, making me question her appreciation for her guests' efforts. We wore our old gold jewelry and shoes. She didn't provide an itinerary or any planned events for the bridal party during the 5 days. This wedding was estimated to cost between $5,000 and $8,000 Canadian dollars, not to mention the week of unpaid time off work. She believed she only had to cover expenses for the wedding day and considered the rehearsal dinner a gift. The bride and groom didn't feel obligated to make the bridal party and guests feel appreciated. They were also planning a $50,000 safari for part of their honeymoon. I have been deeply involved in the wedding planning, even organizing the entire baccalaureate party. However, my efforts were marred when my friend relayed a negative comment from one of her friends about the baccalaureate location after I had already planned the trip. When I expressed feeling unappreciated, she did apologize, but it left me questioning my decision. Am I the asshole here? My friend's family and others are advising me not to go, considering the substantial cost of $5,000, plus a week of lost wages, and being entirely on someone else's schedule. They suggest I apologize with vague comments about wishing them the best but explaining I won't be able to make it. They're convinced that I shouldn't go, arguing that I shouldn't spend such a significant amount on something like this. Furthermore, taking time off or losing a week's pay for this event seems unreasonable. While I'm willing to go to great lengths for my best friend, it appears she's expecting too much without considering the financial impact on me. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, don't forget to hit the like button. Let's dive into our next story. I, a 31-year-old female, met Lisa, a 36-year-old female, in my accounting class, and we bonded as adult students. Lisa was severely behind on her homework due to a pipe break at her place. She and her 2 daughters had to shower at a hotel on weekends and make do with sink wash-offs during the week. Despite her challenging situation, she took on 7 classes this semester to graduate on time in May. She asked if I could stay with her at school for a homework session. I explained it was uncomfortable for me and invited her and her daughters over for a joint homework session and playdate at my home. She expressed her gratitude and said she would bring a pizza for the kids, planning to arrive at 6:30 p.m., excited to cook curry chicken and rice. I started preparing before her arrival. However, she showed up earlier than expected at 5:30 p.m. I had made enough for her, myself, and my neighbor along with their kids, who were fans of my cooking. I hadn't prepared anything for my son and my classmates' kids, as my son had expressed a preference for ramen, and she had mentioned bringing pizza. When she arrived, she immediately went upstairs to use the bathroom. It was slightly awkward, but I brushed it off. However, I noticed she hadn't brought any pizza, so I inquired. She explained she got her 2 daughters Wendy's instead. I asked her daughter's age, and she said 5, although she looked older and taller than my son. The mom corrected her, stating she was 3 and had a speech impediment. Despite noticing the kids asking for food, I didn't offer them my leftovers, thinking it wasn't my responsibility. Later, the kids expressed their reluctance to leave, and the mom asked if they could spend the night. Overwhelmed and considering it was a weekday, I declined. Am I the asshole for not sharing my leftovers, which consisted of 1 piece of chicken, rice, and veggies, and refusing to let them spend the night? I did provide the kids with snacks like popcorn and Oreos. She mentioned the 9-year-old's Wendy's meal had been accidentally thrown away. Second edit. I invited her over for dinner, but she declined, citing her class that night. I suggested the kids could come over when she attended class instead of staying with their dad. This was what she had told me about their routine. After discussing her situation, she revealed they were homeless and washed up at school due to broken pipes. She asked to stay overnight, but I declined. Am I the asshole for not helping her and her kids in this situation? Many have suggested calling child services. In our 4th and final story, my family has always been well off, enjoying frequent vacations. However, when my dad recently booked a trip to Italy, there was an oversight regarding my wife. In a family group chat buzzing with excitement, I called my dad to thank him for including my wife, who had often felt left out. To my surprise, my dad informed me that he had booked the available seats, leaving no room for my wife. He hadn't considered her in his plans. I now realize many might consider this a mere mistake, but I disagree. This exclusion isn't an isolated incident, it's part of a pattern. My wife has been overlooked in various ways before. If it were genuinely a mistake, my dad would have made every effort to rectify it before the vacation was announced. My heart sank when I realized my wife had once again been disregarded. I glanced at her. She could sense something was amiss. That's when I firmly told my dad to give my seat to someone else. If she wasn't included, I wouldn't be going either. In the past, I used to find ways to include my wife, but I was weary of always having to advocate for her. They never did this to my sister and her husband. They were always included as a couple. But when it came to my wife and me, we always had to find our own way in, as if we weren't taken seriously. I decided I wouldn't do that anymore. This time, I drew a hard line in the sand. This man had the audacity to suggest that my wife and I could book our own flight and just meet them there. My response was a resounding no, and I hung up. Needless to say, my wife was in tears, upset but also relieved that I stood up for her. A couple of days passed, and my wife and I decided to embark on our own vacation to a more modest location. A large rental cabin with her family, who are incredibly supportive. When my family found out, they bombarded my phone with messages. My mom even called, telling me I was being unreasonable. According to her, it was just a simple mistake on my dad's part, and I could easily book a separate flight and plan an entirely different vacation with my wife. I explained to her that this was about the consistent exclusion of my wife from every family-related event since our marriage. My mom dismissed my concerns, calling me crazy and insisting I was overthinking the situation. Despite her words, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this exclusion than met the eye. Thank you all for your overwhelming support. My wife and I had a heart-to-heart discussion about our next steps. We decided to have a family meeting with my relatives this Monday and confront them head-on. We believe it's the best way to address the situation and seek honest answers from them. Many of you mentioned gaslighting, and we intend to learn more about it to protect ourselves better. I made a promise to my wife when we got married. She would always be my priority. I intend to keep that promise. Thank you once again for your support, and I hope to provide you with an update soon. Best wishes to all. Let me begin by apologizing for the length of this story. When I was 15, my dad passed away. He and my mom weren't particularly close at that time, so while his death hit me hard, my mom didn't seem as affected as one might expect. I decided to join the military at the age of 17, spending my first year away from home. During my absence, my mom remarried, but I didn't really connect with my stepdad. We had different personalities, and he often made snide remarks, telling me to toughen up whenever I was upset about something. Although both of us were at fault for our disagreements, they never escalated too far. After serving for nearly 5 years, I was medically discharged. My mom and stepdad welcomed me back home, assuring me it was a happy reunion. I intended it to be brief, just until I found a job and got back on my feet. I even offered to pay rent, but they declined. However, just 3 days after returning home, my stepdad approached me about contributing to the rent. I was puzzled, but since it was his house, we agreed on an arrangement. Strangely, he never mentioned this to my mom, so I assumed he preferred to keep it between us. I never asked for assistance from them, not out of spite, but because I wanted to be independent. In contrast, my stepdad, who was only slightly older than me, had received substantial financial support from my mom and her husband. They paid for his education, his car, and his living expenses throughout college and beyond. It felt disheartening that he received all this help, while I was immediately asked to pay rent. Despite our age difference, we got along fairly well. The only issue was this disparity in support. After 3 months, I moved out and soon after met a girl I was crazy about. We started dating, and I was ecstatic throughout the relationship. However, I was apprehensive about introducing her to my mom, fearing her judgment. Surprisingly, my worries were unfounded. My mom and my girlfriend got along remarkably well. My girlfriend didn't have much of a family, and my mom and stepdad became like family to her. They bonded so well that they would hang out together, sometimes just the two of them. I was thrilled to see this connection, and my stepdad even liked her, which brought us closer together, a bond I hadn't known I wanted until then. My stepdad had overcome significant challenges in his life. His father had abandoned their family, and he managed to put himself through school, securing a high-paying job on his own. I admired his self-reliance immensely. After a year of dating, I knew I wanted to marry this girl. When I shared my feelings with my mom and stepdad, They seemed genuinely happy. She had already become an integral part of our family, practically one of us. My mom then handed me her engagement ring, a precious heirloom from my dad, which she had kept. The job I had didn't pay much, so I thought, even if it wasn't the ultimate ring, it should always have a special place. I considered it a great placeholder. When I proposed to my girlfriend with the ring, she told me it wasn't just a placeholder. She absolutely loved it. I had never been happier in my life. We started planning our wedding, and to my surprise, my mom and stepdad offered to help with the finances. It was the first time they had offered me financial assistance, and it felt surreal. Fast forward about 3 months, I received a call from my stepdad, and it felt ominous. I went over to their place after work. When I arrived, I saw my mom, stepdad, stepbrother, and my fiancé, who was sitting on the couch, clearly upset. I thought someone had died. I moved to sit next to her, but my stepdad stopped me. He accused me of cheating on her throughout our entire relationship. I was baffled and denied the accusations vehemently. I told everyone there that I never even texted other women I wasn't related to besides my fiancé. Apparently, some girl had obtained my fiancé's number and claimed that we had been having an affair for over a year. She didn't know I was in a committed relationship. She sent my fiancé screenshots of alleged conversations and details about my life that a stranger shouldn't know. I couldn't grasp what was happening. I was shocked, heartbroken, and furious. My fiancé looked at my phone, confirming I had never sent those messages. Both she and my mother were in tears, and I couldn't hold back my own. My stepdad hurled every insult he could think of at me and forcibly escorted me out of the house. He warned that if he ever saw me on his property again, he'd involve the police. In the following weeks, I tried desperately to contact them, sending calls, texts, voicemails, and messages on every available app. But there was no response. After a month of silence, my stepdad called, instructing me to stop trying to reach my fiancé. He made it clear that I was no longer welcome in their home or around their family. I attempted to call my mother during that time, but she didn't answer either. All I received was a text expressing her sadness and disappointment. My mom didn't have much family, so they usually spent holidays with my stepdad's relatives. They all ostracized me, sharing Christmas photos on Facebook where my ex-fiancé appeared happy and content, which devastated me. The only family member who stood by me was my dad's brother and his family. Even they seemed hesitant around me. The only person who truly believed my innocence was my uncle. I genuinely believe I wouldn't have made it without him. He showed me the kind of fatherly love I had been missing, and I can't express how grateful I am for him. About 6 months after the incident, I decided to move away from the East Coast and settle down in California, needing a fresh start. Less than a year after my move, I received a call from a familiar area code back home, which was rare. I hesitantly answered, and it was my stepbrother on the line. I promptly hung up, feeling a mix of emotions. He called back, and after much internal debate, I answered that night. The conversation was awkward at best. He told me my ex-fiancée had been devastated for a long time. It took her nearly a year to even consider dating again. Meanwhile, I hadn't moved on at all. A few months into her dating attempts, my stepdad encouraged my stepbrother to ask her out. Things seemed all right in the beginning, but they never really clicked. Apparently, my stepbrother confided in my stepdad about this, who, in a fit of misguided advice, told him, "I didn't get rid of my name for nothing. She's a great girl. You need to figure it out with her." I was dumbfounded, quickly replaced by anger. It turned out my stepdad had orchestrated a scheme. He got a girl I didn't know to pose as someone I had an affair with, forging message screenshots and sending them to my ex-fiancée. My stepbrother had been burdened by this information for about a month before he finally revealed the truth to me. He was planning to tell my mom and ex-fiancée the next day. I asked him to hold off on contacting me, giving me time to process everything. That was last Tuesday. I reached out to him recently, telling him I was ready to talk to them, and they could call me tomorrow. I don't know what to say, and I'm uncertain about forgiveness. So far, The only person I've confided in is my uncle, who I asked to keep this to himself. I apologize again for the length of this. My therapist happened to be on vacation, and I needed an outlet. As for the top advice before reading the updates, you're right. My stepfather is toxic, insecure, and narrow-minded. I genuinely appreciate your perspective. I've come to realize that staying no contact with them is the best decision for my well-being. While I might understand why my ex-fiancée believed the false accusations, it doesn't mean I should rebuild any kind of relationship with her. She didn't trust me or give me a chance to prove my innocence. There are plenty of other women out there who won't be easily manipulated or carry the baggage of mistrust. I'm deeply sorry for all the pain this situation has caused, but I acknowledge that my life will be happier without any of them in it. I can see that this is a lot for you to digest, and I'm relieved that the truth has finally come to light. You have every right to take your time in deciding whether you want to rebuild the relationships that were damaged. It's important to remember that you have the option to do what's best for you. I strongly recommend starting therapy as well, as it can be a valuable resource for processing everything you've been through. We would love to hear from you again and support you as you navigate this challenging situation. As for the first update, I apologize for the delay. It's completely understandable given the circumstances. Your stepbrother reached out to you this morning and provided more details about what happened. Apparently, what your stepfather had initially told you wasn't the whole truth. He was careful with his words, seemingly to avoid directly implicating himself, but heavily implying his actions. It's worth noting that your stepbrother is quite astute. He didn't rush to confront your mother and fiancé in a shouting match with his dad. Instead, he took a more thoughtful approach that you might not have considered. He managed to track down a girl who had been in contact with your stepfather, presumably through Tinder. This discovery strongly suggests that your stepfather had been involved in extramarital affairs, which understandably angered you for obvious reasons. The girl admitted that she didn't sleep with your stepfather, but the truth or falsehood of that statement didn't hold much significance for you. What mattered was that your stepbrother talked to her, sharing the story and convincing her to cooperate. It appears that she was well aware of her actions, and the revelation of what happened to you seemed to affect her profoundly. Regardless of her motives, her willingness to cooperate was what counted. She was compensated with $1,000 for making a phone call, and she was given instructions on what to say and provided pictures as evidence. Your stepbrother also offered to pay her again, for the record. She agreed to do it without charge, and it happened just yesterday. My stepfather is away on a business trip until Wednesday, so it was just the four of them there. She came in and spilled everything to my mom and ex-fiancé. My stepbrother mentioned that tears started flowing almost immediately from all three of them after he disclosed everything. He informed them that I was in California and that he would let them know when I was ready to be contacted. To provide some context, here's a bit of backstory to help you understand my mother and ex-fiancé a little better. Please note that this is not an excuse for their actions. It's merely meant to shed light on their behavior. After my dad passed away, my mother and I became incredibly close. We were each other's support system. However, when I turned 16, I started drinking to cope with my emotions. One New Year's Eve, I ended up out with my friends, leaving my mom alone at home. She texted me, expressing her sadness about being by herself. And from that moment, things were never quite the same between us. My mother has always been the type of person who needs someone around. She struggles to handle being alone. When her love for my dad started to fade, I felt the void. Later, when I grew up and moved out, my stepfather filled that void. As for my ex-fiancée, she never had much of a family and had serious trust issues due to her past relationships. Despite her difficult past, she never spoke ill of her ex-boyfriends, except for one who was physically abusive, a clear exception. Despite my own shyness, I've been told I'm cute, particularly by younger girls, although I never liked that label as it didn't feel very masculine. Eventually, I learned to appreciate my features and how easily I blushed. My fiancé, who is nearly 3 years older than me, preferred older girls. I never paid much attention to younger girls who showed interest in me, yet they continued to approach me. This attention bothered my fiancée. She would often question why I wasn't interested in these younger girls or why I didn't leave her for someone younger and more attractive. I'd always found her incredibly attractive, much more so than I ever saw myself, and I constantly reassured her of that. I made it clear that no other girl held any appeal for me. I hope this insight provides some context for why I think they did what they did and believed what they believed. However, this is not an excuse for their actions, and personally, I am not that understanding. At the end of the call with my brother, he mentioned that both my mom and my ex-fiancée wanted to call me today. I agreed, so I waited patiently. Around 3 p.m., I started to feel a bit puzzled. I began to wonder if my brother had made everything up just to mess with me. This thought genuinely worried me. Then, I received a text from him, asking if I was all right. I replied yes and inquired if they were actually planning on calling. He informed me they had been trying for the past few hours. I had blocked both of them when I moved out west, but somehow I had forgotten to block him. I felt grateful that I hadn't, though. I blocked their calls, and about 10 minutes later, I received a call from my mom. The first thing she said was that I sounded different. I almost hung up right then. It took all I had to just respond with a quiet yeah. She immediately broke down, and I thought I'd feel something more, but the pain of it all just overwhelmed me. She asked if I had received her texts, and I said no. I guess she had been trying to text me over the last year, but I had her number blocked. If she truly wanted to reach me, she could have found a way. It might sound harsh, but I know it's true. I told her I would be willing to rebuild some semblance of a relationship with time, and she seemed content with that. She also informed me that she was removing all her belongings from the house before my stepfather returned, and that she would be filing for divorce immediately. I believed her. She might be a poor excuse for a mother in my eyes, but she's never been someone to take half measures. I really wish I could be there to witness that man's face when he comes back to an empty home. Next, my ex-fiancée got on the phone and offered tearful apologies, much like my mom did. I felt something more talking to her. I tried to get her to remember how many times I assured her I would never betray her and how much I loved her. She was beside herself, and honestly, I'm glad we talked. We had about half an hour of conversation, and I even allowed myself to entertain the thought, despite telling myself for over a year that it would never happen, that there could still be something between us. She mentioned she still had the engagement ring, which upset me deeply. I told her to give it to my mom because it no longer belonged to either of us. I could tell this crushed her, and I'll admit, selfishly, I wanted it to. She asked if she could call or text me. I said it's fine, but not to expect a prompt response either way. I essentially gave her the same ultimatum as my mom. I told her that the chances of us having a future relationship were very slim, which was saddening. She understood this as well. I spoke to my brother last, expressing my gratitude for everything he had done. He was helping my mom retrieve her belongings from my stepfather's house, and he apologized for all that had transpired. He informed me that he was going to disclose the entire situation to the rest of the family, with whom I have no connection and don't anticipate communicating with, except for my stepkid's mother, who happens to be the oldest person in either of our families. She had wished me a happy birthday and Merry Christmas over the last year. Perhaps she doesn't care due to her age, or maybe she felt remorse, but I intend to speak with her. I apologize for all the rambling. I'll be flying home for my uncle's 60th birthday in the first week of March. It will be my first time back since I moved out here, and I definitely plan on seeing my brother. While I'm not opposed to seeing my mom and ex-fiancée, I've made it clear to them that I have a lot of healing to do, as do they. If anything further develops, I will provide another update, perhaps after my trip home. For now, this is the last of what I have to share. I haven't been active on social media much in the last year for obvious reasons, and I haven't come across any similar stories to mine that have been referenced in the comments, but I'd appreciate any if you can find them. Thank you to everyone. In the second update, I received a call from a number back home. I had deleted most of my numbers a while ago from anyone I wasn't in touch with. I answered the call, and it was my stepfather. I immediately hung up and blocked the number. After that, I called my mom, fiancé, and brother to make sure they were safe. My mom is staying at a hotel that he doesn't know about, while my fiancé and brother are at their own residences and feel adequately protected. My stepfather has not shown any indications of being a violent man, but it's better to be safe than sorry. My brother told me that he had received a call from him this morning, but he refused to answer. He just informed him about the situation and told him not to contact any of them. I'm not sure how long my stepfather sat there, but he called me around 3 p.m. Pacific time. About an hour ago, I received a message from a different number saying, "We need to talk." I assume it's him, and I haven't responded. That's the latest. In the third update, my stepdad's mother called me. I had her number saved due to the reasons I mentioned earlier. I was a bit concerned that it might have been him trying to gather information, but it wasn't. She's a very kind lady who didn't have to be nice to me in any way, but she showed me compassion. She was very pleasant and wished me well, while also apologizing on behalf of the family. I thanked her and wished her the best as well. It was surprising that this message came from her. I am Laura, 29 years old, and my husband is Richard, 30 years old. We made the decision to live with his parents because Richard often expressed his desire to give back to his parents someday, considering himself the eldest son. Richard's parents are incredibly kind and uphold strong values that I deeply respect. I believe that if we have children in the future, it would be beneficial for them to grow up around their grandparents, learning about society through their experiences. Therefore, I was in favor of the idea of living together. However, there was a catch in this seemingly perfect in-law setup. Richard's unmarried sister, Melissa, 26 years old, also lived at home. My first encounter with her was when I went to announce our engagement, and she remarked sarcastically, "So, you're the latest addition to the family, huh?" My initial impression of my sister-in-law was unfavorable. She seemed to disapprove of her parents' approval of me and displayed a bad attitude. A few weeks after moving in, during a meal, I was serving food to everyone at their respective places. Melissa suddenly exclaimed in disapproval, "Wow, what? You placed the food at your seat first." I was taken aback by her unexpected outburst. I explained that my seat was closest to the kitchen, but she continued to make a fuss, insisting that I should have served her first. Witnessing this, my husband stepped in, reminding her of the importance of respecting me as the wife of the eldest son. However, Melissa retorted, dismissing me as just another woman from outside the family, refusing to acknowledge the significance of our relationship within the family hierarchy. Melissa's remark about me not being particularly attractive and deserving to be treated accordingly elicited a furious response from Richard. Sensing the brewing tension between siblings, I intervened, reassuring Richard and diffusing the situation. "Richard, it's okay, thank you," I said before turning to Melissa. "I'm sorry. Next time, I'll serve your portion first." I had my reasons for diffusing the conflict. Family arguments were counterproductive, especially considering our shared living situation and the fact that Richard had informed me that Melissa was likely getting married soon, which could potentially change our dynamic. However, Melissa's condescending attitude persisted. She would demand things from me with an air of entitlement, criticizing me for not anticipating her preferences. Her demeaning behavior escalated, treating me like a maid. I noticed that she behaved differently when her parents were around, which made me hesitant to discuss the issue with them. One night after midnight, she arrived home completely drunk, waking me up with her complaints. Worried about her safety, I helped her to the living room, where she began to share details about her life. She boasted about her fiancé, emphasizing how different their situation was from mine. According to her, they could afford to order food from any restaurant every day, unlike us, who, in her words, were stuck with bland mushroom soup for the PO. Despite her condescending tone, I chose to remain patient and composed, realizing that her behavior was a reflection of her own insecurities and need for validation. The difference between us became starkly apparent. "I'm not like you, Plain-faced maid? My sister-in-law sneered, demanding water in the middle of the night. I muttered my annoyance under my breath, but she, emboldened by a few drinks, fixed me with a sharp glare. What's with that look? Are you defying me because you're just a maid, living off my parents? It's only fitting to call you that, she scoffed, repeating the word maid with drunken laughter. Despite my urge to retaliate, I restrained myself. I was determined to uphold social manners, especially for the sake of my unborn baby. My husband and I chose to live with his parents to support them. They were good people, and I wanted to help. Yet being looked down upon as a mere maid was infuriating. Trying to distract myself, I began cleaning, but the frustration lingered, my grip on the vacuum tightening. During my cleaning spree, I noticed wedding invitations on the table, suggesting my sister-in-law was getting married. Curiosity piqued. I examined the name on the invitation and realized I knew the guy. An idea struck me. Maybe I could put her arrogant attitude in its place. The day she brought her boyfriend home, I had just finished cleaning the balcony and garage. As I returned inside, she berated me for taking too long, oblivious to the fact that I was just 10 minutes past our agreed meeting time. I echoed her words, emphasizing maid. How many times do I have to tell you? You're basically the maid, she ranted. I smiled inwardly, confident that I could finally show her that being respectful to others, regardless of their status, was the true mark of class. I wouldn't have renewed your contract, I retorted, my words cutting through the air like a knife. Her face flushed with anger, her voice rising in volume. I calculated the perfect moment to strike. Anyone in the living room would surely hear her now. Maintaining an air of innocence, I went to serve the tea. And there he was, Michael. I called out to him just as Isis, my sister's fiancé, did. I had suspected our connection, and my hunch was right. He was her first love. Hot, Laura? Michael looked up in surprise. You haven't changed at all, still as funny as ever, I said, smiling at him. My sister-in-law stared at us, stunned, her head swiveling between the two of us as she tried to comprehend our acquaintance. Michael continued, more than acquaintances, she was my first love. My sister-in-law's face turned pale, and she almost collapsed into her chair. No way, you were engaged too. This woman, you were just a second-hand product. The word second-hand didn't escape my ears. People who belittle others often reveal their true colors. I seized the opportunity, repeating the word for emphasis. He mentioned maid in the kitchen earlier. My sister-in-law stammered, her escape route blocked. Oh, that was just a joke between us. You know how we joke around. She tried to dismiss it, but I wasn't letting her off the hook. Complaining about the table service order and calling me plain Jane, are those jokes too? Because if they are, they're in bad taste, I challenged, refusing to back down. Michael chimed in, objecting to being called second-hand like a thrift store item. The irony of her insults finally struck her, and her discomfort was evident. This was my chance to strike back at the sister-in-law who had made my life miserable. It felt like a miraculous opportunity, a gift from the heavens. Slowly, I approached her, applying gentle pressure. Shall we share some memories of being called second-hand and maid? I said, my tone dripping with irony. As I placed the tea on the table, Michael settled back into the couch, saying, "Thank you, Laura," signaling that the tables had turned in my favor. I first met Lori back in high school when I was part of the basketball team, and she was the captain of the girls' basketball team. During my slumps, she always encouraged me, emphasizing that recognizing the issue was the first step toward improvement. She had a way of offering positive words, even appreciating small details like the trajectory of my shots. Lori's wisdom stuck with me, especially her advice that life wasn't a tournament with definitive defeats, but rather a league where wins and losses alternated. Her occasional gesture of giving me sports drinks meant the world to me. I must admit, I harbored a small crush on her and even asked her out, but Laura was incredibly popular. His expression remained stoic as he continued. After I asked her out one summer and got rejected, Lori remained considerate. She still treated me the same and even continued giving me drinks. My first love was a mix of bitterness and sweetness. He looked directly at my sister-in-law, accusing Laura of being called maid and me secondhand. Suddenly, I saw my opportunity. I now understand the kind of person you are, he said, his voice firm. I can't see us continuing this relationship. My sister-in-law turned ghostly pale and began sobbing, revealing her desperate circumstances. I'm in a tight spot now. I even quit my job. He looked puzzled but remained stern. You quit? He asked. Before she could respond, I jumped in. I didn't ask her to quit, he said. This unexpected revelation provided my chance. Didn't she talk about how you wanted to be together forever? How? With your earnings, she could live a lavish lifestyle, ordering takeout every day. I exposed her deception. My sister-in-law's eyes widened in shock. You didn't have to say all that to Michael, she stammered, attempting to justify herself. I chuckled, confident in my revelation. Of course, I had to say it. After all, I know Michael. It's like watching everything unfold in a reality TV show, except I heard everything in person. Michael buried his face in his hands, clearly overwhelmed by the situation. I never told you to quit your job. I didn't say to continue either, he responded, leaving her to confront her own choices and deceptions. Michael shrugged, voicing his concerns. Did you decide to marry me because of my university and my job? Normally, you wouldn't think of marrying someone who calls you secondhand. It became apparent that Michael was leaning towards breaking off the engagement. My sister-in-law, desperate to avoid that outcome, started making feeble excuses that didn't hold water. Calling you secondhand can't be helped. It's a stain on your past, sure, but while we can't erase the past, we can create a future, he retorted sharply. I intervened, trying to reason with her. I told you I don't see it as a stain. In fact, I see it as a good memory, he added, his frustration mounting. But my sister-in-law's agitation seemed to cloud her judgment, and she began to blurt out nonsensical words. How are you going to take responsibility for me quitting my job? Are you going to pay me damages and support me with that money? If that's the case, we might as well get married. Come on, marry me right now. Right this instant, she yelled, grabbing Michael by the collar. Michael started to speak, his voice trembling. I never asked you to quit. Just then, a trembling voice interrupted, and we turned to see my mother-in-law standing there. I heard voices from downstairs, so I thought Michael was here. When I came down, I saw the two of you arguing loudly. I was waiting for a moment to step in, but what I heard was so unbelievable that I just froze, she said, her expression grim. Behind her, my father-in-law stood imposingly, and even further back, my husband trembled. I really am sorry for what happened, Michael, my father-in-law said. My apologies to Michael too, but the one who's really been wronged is Laura, my mother-in-law added, her eyes welling up. Why did you hurl such harsh words like maid at Laura, who's always been so kind to us? She did everything out of goodwill, and you belittled her. Apologize now. My husband's voice was hoarse as he spoke. Laura didn't want you to hear bad things about your own daughter. She endured it all on her own. I knew about it, but I'm sorry, Laura. I hadn't realized you were being referred to as a maid recently. Apologize now, my mother-in-law said firmly, slapping my sister-in-law across the face. Gritting her teeth and glaring at me, my sister-in-law managed to choke out, I'm sorry. However, Michael intervened coldly. You don't have to apologize to me. I want you to apologize to Laura and ensure you never treat her this way again. I don't want to see my first love cry, but I don't need your apology. I feel bad for your parents, but this was a good opportunity to see the kind of person you are before marriage. Let's forget this ever happened. He turned to my tearful sister-in-law and added, If you have an issue with being secondhand, then you should have stayed away from me. I never asked you to quit your job. As he prepared to leave, he apologized once more to my mother-in-law and father-in-law. At least make it seem like I dumped you, he urged. My sister-in-law screamed. Enough is enough. But my father-in-law also slapped her across the face. Michael, thank you for coming today. I hope you'll find a wonderful person next time, my father-in-law said gently, patting Michael's shoulder. After that, my sister-in-law was forcibly kicked out of the house. Laura, I'm so sorry for everything, my mother-in-law said, apologizing even though she hadn't done anything wrong. We truly appreciate everything you've done for us. I married into this family because I really like you and Father. I want to be with you always, forever, I said, holding Lionel's hand. My in-laws disowned my sister-in-law, vowing never to let her near me again. Months later, my sister-in-law sent an email to my husband, asking for financial help, claiming she couldn't find a job and couldn't pay her rent. However, my husband blocked her in front of me. Several years later, I heard that Michael got married. We started to keep in touch again after the incident with my sister-in-law. By then, I had given birth to our first child. When we have our own kids, I'd like parenting advice from you, Michael said. Yay, our child is so lucky to have grandparents who adore her, I replied. We want our child to be loved and to know love. We named our child Amy, which means beloved.
I'll try my best not to make this a word wall. I don't know where to start. This whole situation is embarrassing, and I am just done with it. I've been with my husband for 5 years now. Married for 3. Well, long story short, his mom was always overwhelming and bold with her input on everything, to put it nicely. I genuinely think it's not fair to be mad at your partner for something he didn't do himself. He can't control what his mom do or say. But what's also not fair is him not addressing it when I am clearly uncomfortable or upset, and instead just talking me into brushing it off or going with it. I never nor would I ever have a back and forth with my mother-in-law. Just not worth barking at each other. I always kind of brush it of if it's a snarky comment or if it's a better way to do something in her opinion. I'll just tell her thanks for the suggestion, but we are fine. It's actually true, the saying, when you marry someone, you marry their family. I think the way to handle it is each spouse should keep his side of the family in line, for lack of a better way to say it. I deal with my parents and their shenanigans, and I expected him to do the same. He never did. He always asks me to give her some grace. Well, it's hard when that person is insulting you. For a while now, she has been making comments about how my son doesn't look like my husband when he was a toddler. Basically accusing me of sleeping around. This, rightfully so, upset me. Sorry, my genes are strong, what do I tell you? I was short with my husband because he didn't address how out of pocket and disrespectful this whole thing is. It has been a week since my husband, well, soon-to-be ex-husband, told me that he would be doing a paternity DNA test. Not because he thinks that it's not his son, but to shut his mom up. Yes, exactly what I read. I don't know which one is worse, him accusing me of cheating or this shit. But all I know is this is audacious. I didn't cheat, and I am not concerned one bit about the test results. I wasn't going to stop him from taking a DNA test or whatever, but I just know I don't want to deal with this any longer. I am looking for an apartment, and I talked to a landlord the day after he brought this DNA test thing up. And I've been acting more than normal since. We'll be getting the results in 2 days. I can't wait. He will be also getting divorce papers with that too. I know for a fact he won't see it coming. I try my best to make this whole thing work and manage my relationship with my mother-in-law as gracefully as possible. But thinking about it, it's not just my mother-in-law that's the problem, but how he is handling things is also a problem. And side note, I've never been more glad that I didn't leave my job when I got married. He makes more than enough to take care of the financial side of things. I thought I would get bored. I only have to be on site 2 days per week. Also, I really love my job and the company, so I didn't leave. Best decision I ever made. He is unreliable, to say the least. I know that divorce can be hard on kids, but I experienced the other side. Living with 2 parents that hated each other and violently fought almost all the time is as hard, maybe even harder. They thought that staying together would be good for me and my siblings. Newsflash, it wasn't. It was traumatizing to say the least. I don't remember, I either read somewhere or maybe my therapist told me that when you fight with your spouse, you shouldn't see it as me vs you. But more like, me and you was the particular situation or problem on hand and try to figure it out. But it's really hard to do so when you start hating that person. I don't want my son to live like that because I tell one thing, I just can't stand my husband anymore. I don't know if this is a weird way of saying it, but I just don't respect him anymore, if that makes sense. I just see an unreliable man, and I know for a fact that our fights won't be the same as before. I would have said what a waste of 5 years, but I have a sweet and smart gremlin now, and having a child really pushes you to be better and to do better, so I can't complain. Update. The day he was supposed to receive the results, I called my father-in-law and invited them to come over that evening. He was working when he got the results. He sent them to me and told me he would talk to his mother to finally put this to rest. I informed him that I had already invited them for this evening, and I am just waiting for my apology before I leave. I asked that he come home so we can talk before they come over. He called, and I basically told him that this is not working for me anymore. I've already talked to an attorney, filed for divorce, and it might be more expensive than a paternity test, but it would be more effective making his mother happy. And no, I don't care that he was working when I told him. I don't think he would have either. He left work and came home. Long story short, we had a spectacular fight. He said that I am not thinking about my son, and I am overreacting because it's not like he went behind my back. And if he knew that I was this upset, he wouldn't have done it. But he knew. We fought about it when he brought it up. He just didn't care. When I gave him the divorce papers, he said he's not signing anything, and he'll ask his mother to apologize when his parents arrive and get done with this. Listen, I don't need him to sign it to get a divorce. It would only make things complicated. That's it. His mother said she has nothing to apologize for. She wouldn't apologize for having suspicions. She didn't accuse me of anything, and I can leave if I want to. So that's that. I did leave that night because I wasn't going to get an apology, and he didn't seem to understand that him reinforcing that it's okay for her to meddle is why I want a divorce in the first place. He eventually told his parents he'll be coming over from time to check up on them. He is their only child, and not to bother coming over anymore until she apologizes. She wasn't amused. She told me I am taking her son away, and some would take my son too. She is not someone that you can talk to, I'll tell you that much. It's like talking to a wall. All she knows is insulting or being passive-aggressive on a good day. We're not getting a divorce. We talked the day after. He said I can always file for a divorce, but we should at least try couples counseling because he doesn't want to co-parent. Edit. He doesn't want to lose his son, plain and simple. Although it's not like, if we were to get divorced, he wouldn't be able to see his son, but whatever. He did say, when we talked the second time, that he can see how he was wrong, especially knowing his mother. He also mentioned that he'll just shut her down if she meddles this time. But what can I do with just words? I hope he can learn a thing or two on how to deal with his mother in counseling, because she is truly overwhelming. If counseling would help him understand that a couple means 2 people, not 3, and our marriage is a bit crowded right now, that's enough for me. People saying that I am overreacting in my last post made me ask myself, do I actually want a divorce or am I just mad? I wanted the divorce at the time. It seemed like the only solution. But if counseling would help us, I can try to work things out. I hope this is a good decision. If not, I am not stuck. I'll take my son and leave. I have a friend who got divorced in 20 days, an uncontested divorce. When you are on the same page regarding how things would be divided, including custody, it's a matter of how long the court would take to review and finalize the divorce, and you'll be done. That was my plan. Nonetheless, I am the one working from home, and my son is still so young. It's totally up to him. If he wants to see his son every day when he gets off work, or if he wants to see his son just a couple of times per week. Because I am not tolerating this anymore. Oh, one last thing. People in my last post were debating if paternity tests should be mandatory or not. I thought that from what I wrote, it was clear I didn't cheat, and I have nothing against the paternity test itself. It should be obvious to everyone that it's not fair for the child nor the man to be tricked into living a lie. If he was the one who had suspicions, that's a big deal. We would have talked about why he thinks that, taken the paternity test for his peace of mind, and made sure we can trust each other then move on. All without anyone interfering, let alone requesting the paternity test. Edit 2. Someone asked curious why they asked for the test, and why you're so against it. I don't want to assume there was some troubles in the past, but I feel like there's a lot of lead-up and information left out here. At this point, I've shared so much that these aren't too many details, I guess. I am not religious. I also dated women at a certain time. She doesn't like that and thinks that me not being religious or not being straight means I have no values or something. She hates that her son married a non-religious person. He is a believer, but he's a non-practicing believer. Either way, his religion or my lack of belief doesn't cause us any problems in our day-to-day life. I hope this clarifies things for you.
Hi, I'm Sophie Bennett. I'm 31 years old, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. My life has always been quiet and predictable, but that's how I like it. I work as a nurse at the local hospital here, and it's a job I genuinely enjoy. It brings me a sense of purpose and stability. Every day, I get to care for people and make a small difference in their lives. It's not a glamorous job, but it's mine, and it suits me perfectly. I was raised by my grandfather after I lost my parents when I was young. He was a kind, gentle man who made sure I had everything I needed. My parents' passing was a huge loss, but my grandfather's love and care helped me get through those tough times. He instilled in me a deep sense of responsibility and compassion, values that I carry with me into my work every day. My days at the hospital are filled with familiar faces and routines. There's Mrs. Carter, an elderly lady who loves mystery novels and often asks me about the latest books. Then there's Mr. Davis, a retired teacher who shares his stories of the past whenever he visits. These interactions, though simple, bring me comfort and a sense of belonging. They make my workdays feel meaningful. My life took a sudden turn about 6 months ago when I met Andrew. Andrew is a 34-year-old software developer who had just moved to Asheville for a new job. I first saw him when he came into the hospital to volunteer. At first, I thought he was just another well-meaning individual trying to give back. But as time went on, I realized there was something different about him. Andrew was confident and charming, with a way of making people feel at ease. He started visiting the hospital regularly, always under the pretense of volunteering. I noticed how he took an interest in my work and how he seemed genuinely concerned about the patients. Our conversations were light and pleasant, and he quickly became a familiar face. One day, as we were chatting in the hospital cafeteria, Andrew looked at me with a glint in his eye. "Sophie," he said, "I'd really like to get to know you better. How about we grab dinner sometime?" I was taken aback, but intrigued. "Sure, I'd like that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Our dinner dates became a regular occurrence, and our bond grew stronger with each passing week. Andrew was attentive and kind, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like someone was genuinely interested in me. It was a new and exciting experience, one that I hadn't anticipated but welcomed with open arms. After a few months, Andrew proposed. It was a beautiful evening, and he got down on one knee with a ring that sparkled in the dim light. "Sophie, will you marry me?" he asked, his voice full of hope. I hesitated. My heart was pounding, and my mind raced with doubts. I remember how his parents, Evelyn and Charles, had reacted when I met them. They were wealthy and seemed dismissive of my modest background. Evelyn's gaze was icy, and Charles's remarks about my lack of social standing made me feel small. Despite my reservations, I said yes. I told myself that Andrew's love was worth navigating these new, uncomfortable social dynamics. I was willing to overlook the disapproval of his parents and focus on the love we shared. At their insistence, we signed a prenuptial agreement. Andrew assured me it was just a formality, and I agreed without much fuss. I didn't have much to lose, or so I thought. After our wedding, I moved into Andrew's house. It was a lovely place, but it quickly became clear that it wasn't truly ours. Evelyn and Charles frequently visited unannounced, and their behavior was both intrusive and demeaning. They would walk into the house and immediately make themselves at home, often reminding me of my place. One day, Evelyn walked into the kitchen and said, "Remember, Sophie, in case of a divorce, you can't claim any of this." Her comment stung, but I tried to brush it off. It was a constant reminder that everything in the house, from the furniture to the decor, was not truly mine. Andrew's behavior started changing, too. He became distant and began joining in on the jokes his parents made about me. It was painful to see the man I had fallen in love with turning into someone unrecognizable. The stress of living in such a toxic environment began to take its toll on me. I started experiencing severe stomach pains, but I tried to ignore them. It wasn't until I collapsed at work that I realized how bad things had become. I woke up in the hospital, feeling weak and alone. The doctor said it was stress-related, and I knew that something had to change. During my hospital stay, I received a visit from a lawyer. He informed me that my great-aunt, whom I barely remembered, had passed away and left me a $15 million inheritance. The news was shocking and surreal. For a moment, I couldn't comprehend the magnitude of it. My life had been so simple, and now it was about to change dramatically. Andrew and his parents were suddenly overly affectionate when they learned about the inheritance. Their sudden shift in behavior was unsettling. I overheard them talking about how they could secure the money for themselves. That's when I realized their true intentions. The kindness they had been showing was nothing more than a facade. I knew then that I had to take control of my life and stand up for myself. The inheritance was a turning point, but it was up to me to decide how to use it and how to move forward. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to reclaim my life and find a way to turn this unexpected fortune into something meaningful. The moment I learned about the $15 million inheritance, everything felt like it was spinning out of control. The shock was overwhelming, and I felt a mix of fear and excitement. The money was a significant amount, enough to change my life completely. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how it might also change the dynamics in my marriage. Andrew's sudden concern and his parents' overly attentive behavior made me uneasy. They were no longer the same people I had known before the inheritance news. Their fake concern and gestures of affection felt like a ploy. I could see right through them, and their true colors started to show. After my discharge from the hospital, I began to consider my options. I knew I couldn't stay in the house where I was constantly belittled and reminded of my place. Andrew's behavior had turned hostile, and the loving husband I once knew seemed to be lost. I needed to make some serious decisions about my future. One evening, as I was sitting alone in the house, I found myself thinking about the inheritance and what it could mean for me. I had always been a practical person, and now was no different. I decided to meet with the lawyer who had informed me about the inheritance. I needed to understand the full extent of my new reality and what steps I should take. When I met with the lawyer, he explained that the inheritance came with a significant amount of responsibility. The funds were intended for me to use as I saw fit, but there were legal safeguards in place to ensure that no one else could claim them. That brought me some relief, but I knew I had to act quickly to protect myself. With a clear understanding of my legal rights, I began to plan my next steps. I decided to file for divorce. The prenuptial agreement Andrew and I had signed seemed to protect my assets, but I wanted to make sure everything was handled properly. I met with a divorce lawyer who assured me that my inheritance was safe and would remain solely mine. The hardest part of this process was confronting Andrew. I had to tell him that I was leaving, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. I rehearsed what I wanted to say and prepared myself for his reaction. I didn't want to make any accusations or arguments. I just needed to state the facts and take control of my life. The day came when I finally faced him. We sat down in the living room, and I took a deep breath. "Andrew, we need to talk," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. I've decided to file for divorce. The recent events have made me realize that this relationship isn't what I thought it was. I need to take control of my life and protect my future. Andrew's face turned pale. He looked stunned and confused. Sophie, wait, let's talk about this, he stammered. We can work things out. I shook my head. I don't think we can. The way you and your parents have treated me has made it clear that this marriage isn't healthy. I need to move on and focus on what's best for me. His parents, who had been hovering in the background, rushed in when they heard the conversation. Evelyn's face was a mix of anger and disbelief. You can't do this, Sophie, she said. This is all a misunderstanding. Charles chimed in. You have no right to leave with that money. It's meant for the family. Their attempts to convince me otherwise only reinforced my decision. I was no longer willing to be a pawn in their game. I stood firm and told them that I had made up my mind and that the divorce was happening. Over the next few weeks, the divorce process was a whirlwind. I packed up my things and moved out of the house. It was bittersweet to leave behind the place where I had hoped to build a life with Andrew, but it was also liberating to finally be free from the toxic environment. I found a small, cozy apartment that felt like a fresh start. It was a place where I could begin to rebuild my life on my own terms. The weight of the inheritance was still heavy, but I knew it was time to focus on using it in a way that would bring me peace and fulfillment. The money had given me an opportunity to change my life, and I was determined to use it wisely. The next step was to find a meaningful way to honor my great-aunt's legacy and make a positive impact with my newfound fortune. Starting over was never easy, but it was necessary. After the divorce, I moved into a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. The space was modest, but it felt like a sanctuary from the chaos I had left behind. With the inheritance now firmly in my control, I had the freedom to shape my future. But I needed to find a purpose for it beyond just my personal comfort. My great-aunts will have left specific instructions. Part of the inheritance was to be used for a charitable cause. I was determined to honor her wishes and make a positive impact. I started researching local organizations and causes that resonated with me. I wanted to find something that aligned with my values and experiences. One cause that particularly struck a chord was supporting victims of domestic abuse. My own experience with Andrew and his parents had given me a new perspective on the challenges faced by those in toxic and abusive relationships. I knew I wanted to help others find a way out of similar situations. I reached out to a local organization that helped domestic abuse survivors. The organization, called Safe Horizons, was dedicated to providing shelter, counseling, and resources for those in need. I scheduled a meeting with the director, who was both welcoming and appreciative of my interest. During our conversation, I learned about the gaps in their services and the challenges they faced in securing funding. The more I listened, the more I realized that my inheritance could make a significant difference. I decided to use a portion of the $15 million to help Safe Horizons expand their services. I funded the establishment of a new shelter, which would provide safe housing and support for victims of abuse. It was a substantial investment, but I felt a deep sense of purpose in contributing to such a meaningful cause. As the shelter began to take shape, I became more involved in its development. I met with architects, social workers, and other professionals to ensure that the facility would meet the needs of its future residents. I also helped organize fundraising events to support the shelter and raise awareness about domestic abuse. The process was both challenging and rewarding. It required a lot of time and effort, but it also brought me a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was making a real difference. The project gave me a renewed sense of purpose and helped me heal from the wounds of my past. During this time, I also reconnected with an old friend, Emily. We had lost touch over the years, but when I reached out to her, she was incredibly supportive. Emily had always been a source of strength and encouragement in my life. We spent hours catching up and discussing my new project. Her presence was a comforting reminder of the positive relationships I had in my life. As the shelter neared completion, I was invited to the grand opening ceremony. It was an emotional event, filled with gratitude and hope. Seeing the shelter come to life and knowing that it would provide a safe haven for those in need was incredibly rewarding. It was a testament to the positive change that could come from overcoming adversity and taking control of one's life. While the shelter was a significant achievement, I knew that my journey wasn't over. I continued to work closely with Safe Horizons, providing ongoing support and advocating for the cause. I also made it a point to stay involved in my community and support other initiatives that aim to empower individuals and promote social justice. Looking back, I realize how far I've come since those dark days with Andrew and his family. The inheritance, while initially a source of stress and uncertainty, ultimately became a catalyst for positive change in my life. It allowed me to rediscover my sense of purpose and find fulfillment in helping others. The road to self-discovery and empowerment wasn't easy, but it was worth every step. I had broken free from a toxic relationship and used my newfound fortune to create something meaningful. As I continued on this journey, I felt more confident and capable than ever before, ready to embrace the future with hope and determination. I never imagined how dramatically my life would change after those tumultuous years. The final chapter of my story is one of renewal and self-empowerment, of finding strength I didn't know I had, and embracing a future full of possibilities. After the shelter was established and functioning smoothly, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Helping Safe Horizons provide a sanctuary for victims of domestic abuse was more than just fulfilling my great-aunt's wish. It was a personal victory. I had turned the pain and betrayal I experienced into something positive that could help others. The knowledge that lives would be changed because of the support we provided gave me immense satisfaction. However, my journey didn't end there. The money from the inheritance had given me a new perspective on what I wanted from life. I had been so focused on recovering from my past and establishing the shelter that I had almost forgotten to think about my own personal growth and happiness. I decided to take some time for myself and explore interests and activities I had neglected for years. One of the first things I did was to reconnect with my passions. I had always loved painting, but had put it aside for practical reasons. I began taking art classes and found a creative outlet that allowed me to express myself and relax. The process of painting became therapeutic and a source of joy, reminding me of the importance of nurturing one's passions and creativity. Reconnecting with Emily also played a significant role in this new phase of my life. Her friendship was a steady reminder of the supportive relationships I had, and we spent more time together, exploring new hobbies and simply enjoying each other's company. Emily's presence was a comfort and a symbol of the positive changes in my life. I also decided to take a step back from the intense work of managing the shelter to focus on self-care. I traveled to places I had always wanted to visit, allowing myself to experience new cultures and perspectives. These trips were not just about leisure, but about rediscovering who I was and what I wanted from life. In addition to personal growth, I continued to advocate for the causes I cared about. I became involved in local activism and supported various initiatives aimed at social justice and community support. It was empowering to use my voice and resources to affect change and contribute to causes I believed in. Reflecting on my life, I realized how much I had grown since those early days of struggling with Andrew and his parents. The $15 million inheritance had been a turning point, but it was the choices I made afterward that truly defined my journey. I had learned to stand up for myself, to recognize my worth, and to build a future on my own terms. The experience with Andrew and his family had been painful, but it also taught me valuable lessons about resilience and self-worth. I learned that true happiness comes from within and that breaking free from toxic relationships is essential for personal growth. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, but each step I took led me closer to a life of fulfillment and purpose. As I look forward to the future, I feel a sense of peace and optimism. My life now is a testament to the power of self-discovery and empowerment. I have built a new path for myself, one that reflects my values and passions, and I am ready to embrace whatever comes next with confidence and hope. This journey has been about more than just overcoming obstacles. It's been about discovering who I truly am and what I want from life. And as I continue to move forward, I carry with me the lessons learned and the strength gained from a story that began with hardship but ended in hope and renewal.